Chapter 8:25. Blue light surged on the surface of the lake, and a large number of blue fish gathered in the shallow water in front of the two men's feet. The two men seemed to know the habits of these blue fish very well, so they didn't panic. They were still steadily stabbing the fish with the spear. The other man was carrying the fish in the bag. In the process, the two looked up at the lake from time to time, as if afraid of something. Dean thought of the strange fish he saw last night. He thought that if the strange fish swam over, the two of them would most likely suffer. Thinking of this, he suddenly changed his mind. Wasn't this just an opportunity to get to know them? If he rashly came forward, it would inevitably arouse the vigilance of these people. But if it was a life-saving grace, it was undoubtedly the fastest way to enter the other side. However, looking at the vigilance of the two men, they were already prepared. Counting on the strange fish to attack them, the chances were slim. He soon had an idea. He shook the bell in Aisha's ear very slightly. Aisha heard the sound and controlled the two undeads in the distance to climb up from the grass and swim towards the two men by the lake. The two men by the lake moved quickly. In the blink of an eye, they had stabbed more than a dozen fish. They were about to turn and leave, but saw two ferocious undeads coming out of the woods. The two men were scared and pale. The man with the spear quickly reacted. He took out a handful of powder from his backpack and patted it on his body. At the same time, he patted the powder on his companion's back and pointed to the fish in his companion's hand. The companion was stunned for a moment. There was a trace of reluctance in his heart, but he quickly put the fish in the bag on the ground. Then the two men slowly moved to the side. Dean smelled the smell of the undead powder. He couldn't help but feel a trace of interest. They actually knew how to make undead powder to avoid the undead. No wonder they could survive in the abyss. However, he let Aisha control the two undeads and walked straight towards the two men. At the moment, the two men had moved to the other side like thieves. The middle-aged man with the spear was very nervous. He held his companion's hand tightly to calm him down. But the next moment, the two undeads didn't look at the fish bag on the ground and directly rushed to the two men. The middle-aged man's pupils constricted in fear. "Run!" With that, he turned around and ran. However, their speed could not be compared with the two pioneer-level walking corpses. In the blink of an eye, the roar of the two people was approaching from behind. The hysterical and hoarse roar made the two people's hair stand up and their scalps numb. The blood of the whole body seemed to flow backward in their brains. Their hearts were beating wildly. They only felt that death was approaching infinitely. But in the next moment, the two of them saw a figure in ferocious armor suddenly jump out from the bushes in front of them, holding a black broadsword and charging straight at them. The two of them were dumbfounded. They didn't expect to see other humans here and couldn't wrap their heads around it. In the next moment, Dean passed by the two men and waved his broadsword to meet the two undeads behind them. He didn't kill them directly, but deliberately fell into guerrilla warfare. At the same time, he maintained the upper hand, so as not to be in a disadvantageous position and scare the two directly away. After all, it was the norm in this wilderness to not help others. The two men turned their heads and saw Dean fighting fiercely with the two undeads. The panic in their hearts was slightly stabilized. Soon they saw the situation of victory tilting towards Dean's side. In the joint attack of the two undeads, Dean performed with ease, but occasionally it was somewhat thrilling. After 2 minutes of guerrilla warfare, Dean drilled a gap and beheaded one of the blade undead. The splitting sword directly cut off its head. After killing one undead, the remaining one was also killed by Dean's broadsword in the blink of an eye. Dean exhaled lightly and forced out hot sweat. He turned to the two men, wiped the blood on the broadsword, and put it away to show that he was not hostile. The two men were relieved to see that Dean was not malicious. The middle-aged man reached out to his chest and said gratefully, "Thank you for your help. My name is Prele. What's your name?" When he asked, he looked at Dean with respect and curiosity, especially the hideous armor on Dean's body, which made his eyes a bit envious. Dean was surprised to hear his language. It was English. At the same time, he was relieved. If it was another language, it would be very troublesome to communicate. He quietly observed the two men. From their expressions, there was no rejection and vigilance, indicating that his plan was half successful. He said in English, "My name is Dean. It's safe here. They were all killed by me." He didn't directly ask the identity of the two men, but inadvertently repeated the previous things to increase the impression in their hearts. Hearing Dean's words, Prelay glanced at the two heads of the undeads rolling behind Dean's feet. The gratitude in his eyes was even more intense. He said, "Thank you for your help. Without you, we would have been dead." "It's nothing. Don't mention it," Dean said. At this time, the dawn shone from behind Dean. Prilay's face slightly changed as if he was awakened. He said to Dean, "Mr. Dean, the night is coming. It's very dangerous here. Would you like to go back to the camp with us? I want to thank you for saving our lives." "Me too." His companion, who had a few crooked scars on his face, said with sincerity. Dean felt strange. Wasn't it safer to come during the day? How could it be dangerous? He didn't ask much. He nodded. "Okay, wait for me. I have a friend. I'll ask her to come with us." Prelay was stunned. There was a trace of hesitation in his eyes. At this time, Dean had turned to the grass. He pulled Aisha up and said to the two men, "Let's go." Prelay glanced at Aisha, and a trace of amazement flashed in his eyes. Although Aisha was wearing a veil, but he could still see the flawless outline of her cheek. Moreover, her white skin and graceful figure were out of place in the surrounding environment. Okay. Prelay nodded. He secretly swallowed his saliva and said to his companion, "Go and get the fish." He took out a bag from his backpack and picked up the two undead's heads from the ground. He put them into the bag and handed it to Dean. "This is your loot," Dean said. "It's for you." Prelay was startled. He didn't expect Dean to give him such a precious thing. He stared at him. "For me? Really?" "Really." Prelay couldn't help but be excited. He held the two heads in his arms and thanked Dean again and again. His companion came over with the fish bag. He looked at him with envy. "Old Prelay, this thing can be your heirloom." Chapter 8:26. Dean held Aisha's hand and followed the two back the way they came. After walking for 7 or 8 miles, they came to a canyon separated by 2 mountains. Dean had been here before when he went to the lake. He had seen the footprints of Prelay and the other abyss dwellers, but he didn't find any traces of habitation. At this moment, Prelay stopped in front of the canyon and seemed to be looking at something. After a moment, he came to a rock and gently tapped it with the spear in his hand. Dean was surprised to see his action. His pupils flashed and he instantly saw through the rock. The rock was extremely thick, about 3 meters in diameter. Behind the rock was a deep tunnel. Rumble! After Prelay tapped 6 times, the rock slowly rolled, revealing a gap. Prelay motioned to Dean and took the lead to go in. Dean pulled Aisha and drilled into the crevice of the rock. As soon as he stepped into the tunnel, he saw 2 burly men with strange paint standing behind the stone. He was surprised because he didn't see these 2 men when he used his X-ray vision to observe. The 2 giants froze on the spot when they saw Dean and Aisha behind Prelay. It took a few seconds for them to react. They immediately took their axes from the rock wall and pointed at Dean with vigilance. Prelay quickly said, "Wilderness generals, he is the savior of me and Poke. He has no malice." The 2 giants looked at him and examined Dean and Aisha for a moment. Their eyes lingered on Aisha for a while, but they quickly retracted their eyes. One of the giants with a bird tattoo said, "You 2 fools! You actually brought outsiders back without authorization. Do you want to bring disaster to the camp?" Prelay smiled. "How could it be? He has no malice." The bird tattooed giant snorted as he looked at Dean. I hope you will leave as soon as possible because of your kindness to them. Dean didn't expect to be stopped here. Naturally, he couldn't retreat. He looked unhappy. Is this how you treat your benefactor? Now that the night is coming and it's so dangerous outside, you want me to leave? Isn't it the same as asking me to die? So what's the difference between you and killing me? His words were based on the previous words of Prelay. Although he didn't know what danger the night was coming, but since Prelay was in such a hurry to return, it was obvious that there was a powerful character coming out. The bird-tattooed giant was startled when he heard Dean speak their language. He looked at Dean in surprise but soon frowned. I don't care where you come from. We have treated you well by not killing you. You have saved them. Prelay, give him the fish that you have hunted and we will repay the kindness. Outsider, leave quickly or don't blame me for being impolite. Dean slightly bowed his head. There was a trace of killing intent in his eyes, but it quickly disappeared. He turned to Prelay. I'm leaving. I hope you can live well. The area around the lake is dangerous. Don't go fishing there in the future. Priley's heart was burning as he heard Dean's words. He couldn't help but turn to the bird-tattooed giant. General Bird, they are our benefactors. We have always been grateful. Now that the night is here, letting him leave is tantamount to sending him to his death. I'm going to report to the great priest and let her decide. The bird-tattooed giant's face was gloomy. Even if you talk to the great priest, she won't agree to let him in. I'm going to try, Prelay resolutely said. The bird-tattooed giant frowned and was silent for a moment. He looked at Dean. You stay here. Prelay, you will be severely punished if you disturb the great priest. I'll give you a quarter of an hour. If you don't reply then I'll immediately expel them. Prelay nodded and looked at Dean. Mr. Dean, wait for me here. I'll be back soon. Then he looked at Dean and quickly ran into the tunnel. Dean looked at Priley's back, but his eyes quickly entered magic pupil state. His field of vision quickly extended. He saw that the sand and stones in the dark tunnel were clearly visible, extending all the way to the bottom. In the blink of an eye, Priley's figure disappeared without a trace. At the end of the tunnel, he couldn't see any heat source. Dean didn't look at it and quietly withdrew his eyes. Mr. Dean, I'll accompany you, Priley's companion said. Dean nodded to him. Thank you. In the blink of an eye, 10 minutes passed. Dean silently calculated the time. There were still 3 minutes before the quarter hour. He saw Priley's figure appear at the end of the tunnel. He was panting, and his expression seemed to be very happy. Dean was relieved to see his expression. Bird General, the great priest said that I'll take them to see her. Prelay panted and raised a piece of brocade cloth in his hand. The word God was embroidered on it. The bird-tattooed giant and the lion-tattooed giant's face changed as they saw the brocade cloth. They raised their hands to cover their chest and knelt on one knee. We will obey the god's order. Dean looked at the brocade cloth but didn't say anything. He nodded to the two giants and turned to follow Prelay into the depths of the tunnel. What is the great priest? Dean asked Prelay. Priley's face showed a pious look. The great priest is the great priest. She is the greatest person here. We follow the instructions of the great priest to survive in this evil land. Dean's eyes lit up. It seemed that the great priest was their leader. However, a person like Prelay was able to meet the great priest. It showed that the number of survivors here wasn't that large. If it was a tribe of hundreds of thousands of survivors, then the leader wouldn't be able to meet in 10 minutes. The number of people here was likely to be less than 3,000 or even less. Dean was a bit at ease after speculating about the situation here. But he still had a trace of fear as he couldn't see the two wilderness generals with his X-ray vision. He didn't know the reason why. Chapter 8:27. Soon, an underground village appeared in front of Dean. Houses with strange shapes were built with rock. They were simple and rough. There were weeds filling the gaps. There were several barefoot children running on the path. Most of them had flaxen or brown hair color. There were bowl-sized lamps on the rock wall above the village, exuding light like the halo of an electric bulb. Dean was surprised. He did not expect that there were humans living underground, and there were a lot of them. The strangest thing was that compared with the rough houses on the ground, the lights above their heads were electric lights, not special crystals or firefly pebbles. Uncle Prelay. A few children who were playing saw Prelay coming out of the tunnel and immediately gathered around him, chattering, "Uncle Prelay, did you catch any fish today? Can you take me outside next time?" Uncle Prelay, who is this brother and sister? They are dressed so strangely. Wow, are these weapons made of magic iron? Priley's face was full of smiles and was extremely kind. He said, "This brother and sister are outsiders. I'm going to bring them to see the great priest. I'll tell you all when I return. You guys go play first. Be obedient." People from the outside? Wow! People from the outside? Several children's eyes lit up as they heard his words. They curiously looked at Dean and Aisha. Prelay pushed away several children and led Dean to move forward. They passed several rough houses built with rock. Some houses had dried bacon hanging in front of them. People came out and greeted Prelay with a smile. Some asked him about today's harvest. But soon they were attracted by Dean and Aisha. When asked, Prelay told the truth. It attracted a lot of people's attention. Some showed curiosity. Some lost the smile in their eyes. They looked at Dean and Aisha in horror. They leaned against the door and seemed ready to hide in the house at any time. Dean saw the different expressions of these people. He thought of the words of the general stationed outside the tunnel. His heart sank. He expected that they had encountered outsiders and extremely bad things happened here. However, from the performance of these children and Prelay, this kind of thing happened a long time ago. Time will wear away the memory of some people. Even the next generation will forget the hatred of their homeland. This was the sorrow of human nature, but at this moment Dudian was lucky. At least from the innocent and curious expressions of the children, he could see that they were not afraid of him, an outsider. It was likely that they didn't understand the bad things that had happened to outsiders in the past. Along the way, they passed through dozens of houses. Dean roughly noticed that there were more than 200 people. It didn't take long for them to reach the center of the village. There was an empty miniature square of 200 square meters. Dean was completely stunned when he saw the things in front of the square. He couldn't believe it and was astonished. A steep, sloping ladder extended from midair to the ground. The ladder was made entirely of metal, dark silver in color, and was extremely restrained and high-end. The top of the ladder was connected to an oval metal ball that was suspended in midair. It was shaped like a coconut, and it could probably hold hundreds of people inside. Dean slowly looked up. He found that the elliptical metal ball wasn't completely suspended in the air. There were several extremely thick black iron pillars that were connected to the top of the rock wall. Prelay saw Dean's stunned expression. He gently smiled. "Mr. Dean, the great priest is waiting for you. Please come with me. Don't be too casual when you see the great priest. She is the greatest person in the world." Dean recovered and nodded. He turned to lead the way in front. He couldn't help but use his X-ray vision. He found that the inside of the elliptical metal ball was dark red. What surprised him was that the scene he saw was exactly the same as when he saw through Sylvia's coffin. The elliptical metal ball seemed to be made of the same material as Sylvia's coffin. There were stairs hanging down from the top. It looked like stairs leading to an airplane. There were two giant men with strange monster tattoos guarding the stairs. Dudian knew that they were wilderness generals. His eyes were attracted by a tall statue next to the square. His pupils shrank. The statue was more than 10 meters high. Its upper body was that of a human, but its lower body was that of a ferocious spider. This half-human, half-beast body reminded him of Sylvia again, and this person was also a woman, breathtakingly beautiful. When he saw Sylvia, he thought that she was the most perfect face in the world, but when he saw this woman, he felt that the two were equally matched. This woman's beauty had another kind of temperament, more heroic and alternative charm. "This is our great Origami." Prelay saw Dean stop and turned around. He smiled at Dean. "Origami has been protecting us for hundreds of years. It is reasonable to say that we should salute the Origami. But you are an outsider. It is not too late to salute the Origami after you have seen the great priest." Dean retracted his eyes, but his heart was in turmoil. There was a statue of the god of war in this small village, outside the giant wall. Moreover, it seemed that the god of war was half human and half beast. But why was the god of war in the wilderness of the abyss while Sylvia was in the giant wall? Did the people here used to live in the giant wall but later migrated out? He felt that there should be a lot of secret. He nodded and continued to move forward. "Halt!" The two desolate generals by the side of the stairs stretched out their hands, stopping Prelay. One of them said in a cold voice, "Outsiders can't bring weapons to see the great priest." Prelay turned to Dean. "Mr. Dean, this is the rule." "Don't worry," Dean didn't finish his words. He nodded. "It's nothing. I don't mean any harm." He took off the split sword and put it on the ground. Then he took off the blood vessel from Haisha's back and put it together. He returned to the front of the two wilderness generals. "I don't like others to touch my weapon. I hope you can take care of it for me." The two wilderness generals nodded slightly. "Please." Dean and Prelay immediately went up the stairs. Chapter 828. Whoosh. The metal door slowly rose, and a woman's body fragrance floated out from inside. Dean's heart slightly moved. He was more and more convinced that there was electricity here, but the rough rock house outside seemed to be completely incompatible with the technological level of electricity. He glanced into the cabin and saw a bright red carpet covering the entire aisle. The inside was very spacious, and the walls were emitting holes, illuminating the magnificent interior. Everywhere was bright and luxurious. Prelay bowed his head and took off his shoes. He walked in quietly. Dean didn't wait for Prelay's order. He also took off his boots and walked barefoot on the carpet. He felt that his feet were very warm and soft. It was a huge oval room. After turning the corner of the cabin door, Dean saw the other end of the room. There were several steps. Behind the steps was a curtain. A figure was sitting inside, and a pretty girl was standing in front of the curtain. She was about 14 or 15 years old. She had a pair of golden eyes, and her skin was white and tender. She was very different from the children and residents in the houses outside. Prelay greets the goddess, greets the high priestess. Prelay's face was full of respect as he bowed and knelt down on one knee. Dean didn't salute with him. He stood quietly and looked at the girl and the figure sitting behind the curtain. The thin silk curtain couldn't block his line of sight. There was an old woman in a graceful robe sitting inside. She had a kind face and white hair. She had a Westerner's face, which was somewhat similar to the girl in front of him. Dean suddenly thought that most of the residents he saw along the way seemed to have human faces from the old era of Europe and America. There were few Asian faces. This might be related to the region he was in. The girl who was called Goddess by Prelay looked at Dean curiously. Her big golden eyes flashed. Suddenly her small face turned serious. She frowned. "You two are the outsiders?" Dean nodded slightly. "Greetings to the goddess and the great priest. My name is Dean, and this is my lover, Aisha." He paused for a moment when he introduced Aisha's identity. Saying that she was his companion seemed a bit strange. But saying that she was his wife and lover didn't seem to have obtained her consent. Although he could feel her feelings, but after all, he didn't confess to her when she was alive. He didn't get her consent. But after getting along with her for so long, he had already regarded her as his other half. Even if she didn't agree, he wouldn't allow her to object because he couldn't bear to lose her again. The girl saw a flash of hesitation in Dean's eyes. She felt a bit strange. She said, "I heard that you saved Prelay? I just happened to pass by." Dean didn't dare to take credit. The girl nodded slightly and slowly stepped forward. She came less than half a meter away from Dean. She looked up at Dean. There was no trace of impurities in her pure eyes. It seemed that she wanted to see through all the secrets and shadows in Dean's heart. However, Dean had climbed all the way to the position of the wall master. He also looked down at her. His eyes were pure. There was no trace of distractions. The two looked at each other for a moment. The girl's cheeks suddenly turned red. She took back her eyes and turned to look at Aisha. Her eyebrows wrinkled. "Sister, it seems that you don't have a heartbeat?" Dean's heart shivered. But he had expected the possibility of Aisha being seen through. He immediately said, "She is suffering from a strange disease. It's better not to get too close to her. If there is anything, just tell me." The girl squinted at him. She slightly pouted and turned back to the curtain. "Where are you from?" "From a god's wall," Dean answered truthfully. The girl was startled. She didn't expect Dean to be so frank. Or it was the first time she heard about the wall. She quickly reacted and looked at the curtain. The old woman in the curtain was silent after hearing Dean's words. After a moment, she slightly nodded to the girl. The girl understood and looked at Prelay, who was still kneeling on the ground. "You go down first. The great priest wants to talk to the outsider Mr. Dean personally." Prelay respectfully replied, "Yes, Prelay will go." Then, he lowered his head and slowly walked away. Before leaving, he gave Dean a look of encouragement. After Prelay left, the girl knocked twice on the metal wall next to her. The cabin door slowly descended and closed with a click. In an instant, only Dean and the two girls were left inside. There was a trace of vigilance in Dean's heart, but on the surface he was very calm. At this time, the girl took the lead to talk to Dean. It was as if she had changed into a different person. "What is your purpose in coming here? If I'm not mistaken, the lover you spoke of is a corpse puppet, right?" There was a trace of coldness in Dean's eyes. "You can talk about me, but don't talk about her. I told you that she has a strange disease. I came here just passing by. I didn't expect to meet you here. I didn't know that there are people who can survive in this area. If I had a purpose, I would have attacked you long ago. In my opinion, are you the leaders here?" The girl sneered. "Do it? Do you think you can get out of here alive if you do it?" Dean's heart moved. He had deliberately said so, but looking at the girl's appearance, there seemed to be some kind of mechanism in the spaceship-like metal cabin. When he saw the electricity, he had no intention of using brute force to conquer this place and dig out its secret. He immediately revealed an angry expression and said, "Is this how you treat your benefactor? If you suspect me, why did you come to see me?" Seeing the anger in Dean's eyes, the coldness in the girl's eyes slowly faded. She turned to look at the old woman in the curtain. The old woman nodded to her and took out a bracelet from her sleeve. The girl immediately understood and took the bracelet from the curtain. She turned to Dean. "I was presumptuous before. We have been attacked by outsiders like you and almost destroyed. So I am more worried that you will come here with other purposes like the outsiders. It seems that you really have no intention to come here. The great priest has some questions to ask you. Please put on the bracelet." Dean looked at the pure white metal bracelet in her hand and deliberately showed a gloomy look. "What is this?" "This is the god's bracelet. It contains the power of origami and can see through all lies. If you really have no intention to come here, please put on the bracelet. If you don't want to, please leave here," the girl said seriously. Dean frowned slightly. It was obviously impossible to leave. Moreover, she had already said it. If he didn't put it on, it would mean that he had a guilty conscience. It was tantamount to acquiescing that he came here with other purposes. Then he might not be able to leave safely. It was very likely that they would activate the mechanism in the metal cabin. The mechanism he was most worried about was the laser. Thinking of this, there was a trace of regret in his heart. He shouldn't have boarded this pirate ship. However, with the previous situation, he had no choice but to go down. He could only bite the bullet and go down. If they really fell out, he felt that he could at least kill or capture the girl and the great priest when the mechanism was activated. Moreover, it could be seen from the fact that the girl had to manually close the cabin door. Even if there was an attack mechanism here, it needed to be activated by them. After thinking for a moment, Dean agreed. Although the attitude of the other party was very tough and even overbearing, he had to yield. Who told him to come here with other purposes? Chapter 8:29. The girl looked at Dean but didn't say anything. When Dean raised his right hand, she stepped forward to put the bracelet on Dean's wrist. At this moment, Dean suddenly turned his palm into a claw and quickly grabbed her wrist. At the same time, his other hand grabbed her neck. All of this was done in an instant. In the blink of an eye, the girl was subdued by Dean and became a hostage. You! The girl's face turned pale. The old woman's face changed. She put her hand on the steps next to her. I mean no harm. Dean quickly opened his mouth and released the girl. He looked at her calmly. I just want to tell you that if I was a bad person, I would have the opportunity to capture you and then use you as a hostage to leave here. The girl was released by Dean. She rubbed her neck and coughed twice. She stepped back a few steps and looked at Dean while gnashing her teeth. You sneak attack. Dean didn't speak but looked at the old woman in the curtain. I hope my kindness can also be returned by your kindness. The old woman saw Dean release the girl. Her body also relaxed, but her eyes were obviously more dignified. The girl turned to look at the curtain. The old woman nodded slightly to her. The girl understood. She turned her head and stared at Dean. We won't hurt you. This ring is only effective against evil people. If you have good intentions, you will be fine. Dean didn't say anything and handed it to her. The girl was obviously vigilant this time. She quickly put it on Dean and then quickly returned to the curtain. Dean glanced at the ring on his wrist. The material was very light. There was a screen flashing with wavy lines. In addition, there were a few English letters next to it. This shape combined with the girl's words reminded him of the lie detector he had seen in the super chip. Did you really come to us without any malice? The girl angrily asked Dudian. It was obvious that she was still concerned about the previous matter of being captured by Dudian. Dean looked up from the ring and looked at her lovely little face. He calmly said, Of course not. I have already expressed my position. Can't there be a little basic trust between people? Well, it's useless to talk. The girl slightly pouted and said, Was it really an accident that you saved Prelay? Of course, Dean said without thinking. The girl raised her eyebrows and said, Then why did you leave your hometown and come here? Dean frowned and thought for a moment. This is my private matter. The girl snorted and said, If you don't tell me, how will I know what secrets you have? What if you're coming for us? Dean sighed. There is no harm in telling you since you don't believe me. I want to see the world outside of the wall. As you can see, my lover is suffering from a strange disease. There is no way to treat her in the wall. So I want to see if there are other people living in the outside world. I want to see if there is a way to cure her. The girl looked at him and seemed to believe him. The dissatisfaction on her face gradually disappeared. She said in a low voice, We also have no way to treat this sister. She is not suffering from a strange disease, but a very terrible evil poison. Generally, people who suffer from this kind of evil poison will even attack the people closest to them. I don't know why she did not attack you. I know that her disease is contagious. That's why I told you not to get too close to her. Dean said in a sad tone. The girl slightly raised her head. I knew that there was something wrong with her physical condition. I wouldn't let her bite me. Dean lowered his head and didn't speak again. The atmosphere was a bit sad. The girl came to her senses and coughed awkwardly. She stepped forward and said, I'll take off your divine ring. Dean looked at her. Are you willing to believe me? The girl's cheeks reddened as she looked at Dean's bright and pure eyes. I will listen to the great priest. He stepped forward and took off the spirit ring for Dudian. He looked at the screen and his expression relaxed a lot. He turned back and returned to the front of the curtain. Seeing her like this, Dean was more and more convinced that the ring was an alternative lie detector. After receiving the divine ring, the old woman looked at it for a while before putting it away. Her attitude became much gentler and she said, Outsider youth, thank you for saving our clansmen. Please forgive us if we offended you before. Her voice was extremely sweet and didn't sound like a white-haired old woman at all. Dean was even more convinced that the spirit ring was a device to test the truth of his words. Looking at the situation, it seemed that he had passed the test. I heard that you have met outsiders before and were attacked by them. So it is inevitable that you will be hostile to me. I can understand, Dean said generously. The girl smiled and said slyly, Really? Weren't you very nervous just now? Dean's mouth slightly twitched. He was somewhat speechless. 130 years ago, we met outsiders like you. The old woman slowly opened her mouth. Her sweet voice was refreshing. At that time, we met outsiders for the first time. We were very happy. We accepted him and treated him well. Unexpectedly, the outsider had ulterior motives. He was ready to enslave us and make us his servants. Fortunately, the great priest was powerful enough to kill him. But the great priest was seriously injured. This matter left a deep lesson for us. That's why we offended you. Dean nodded slightly. He could almost guess that it was a routine. However, the words from the old woman's mouth might not be true. Those who could come here were basically abyssal walkers, or even stronger. If these people were in the giant wall, then they would be wall lords. If they were in the kingdom of God, then most of them would be high-level personnel. They would certainly know a lot of secrets. Maybe they came prepared. As for the purpose of attacking them, it might not be to enslave them. After all, there weren't many people here. There were tens of millions of people in the giant wall. How could they lack slaves? Dean felt that the outsider was aiming at the corpses of the war god's family. Chapter 8:30. I'll leave after the night passes. I don't want to disturb you, Dudian said to both of them. The great priest whispered, Mr. Dean, if you don't mind, I would like to invite you to stay with us for a few days. I believe that there are good and bad people in any place. You saved Prele, so we believe in your kindness. As you can see, there are desolate beasts rampaging everywhere outside and corpses roam the land. If not for that outsider from more than 100 years ago, we would not even know that there are other human survivors outside this world. If that outsider had not bared his fangs back then, the goddess of that generation would have married him and become husband and wife. We would have been united with you outsiders because of this. However, we never expected such a thing to happen. Marriage. Dudian looked at the girl in front of the curtain. The girl's cheeks reddened as she stared at Dudian. Why are you looking at me? Dudian looked away. If you don't mind, then I'm happy to stay with you for a few days. If there is anything I can help you with, then don't hesitate to tell me. Thank you, Mr. Dean. Amelie, tell the wilderness generals to arrange a residence for Mr. Dean. He is our distinguished guest. The great priest whispered. The girl slightly pouted as she nodded. Amelie ordered the two wilderness generals to take Dudian to rest after sending him out of the metal cabin. After that, the girl returned to the metal cabin. She lightly knocked on the wall, and the cabin door slowly closed. In an instant, it became extremely quiet, and not a single sound could be heard from outside. Amelie turned to the grand priestess behind the veil. Sister, why did you let him stay? The divine ring clearly shows that he lied. He must have an ulterior motive for coming here. The curtains were lifted, and the old woman looked at her gently. She said softly, although he lied, from the divine ring, He only lied about saving Prelay. He came here without knowing anything, which means he didn't come here on purpose. As for why he deliberately saved Prelay to get close to us, I think it should be because he thought he could find a way to save his lover from us, as he said before. Sister, do you really believe that the corpse is his lover? Amelie pouted. The old woman smiled. Haven't you noticed? That person's expression has always been incomparably cold and emotionless. Only when he looks at the corpse next to him will his eyes reveal a special warmth. That kind of warmth is rare even among extremely loving couples. Furthermore, the results from the divine ring show that he isn't lying about this, so I believe that he's telling the truth. But even so, he's still an outsider. If we let him stay, wouldn't it be very dangerous if he harbors evil intentions? She said. Prelay also said that this person could easily kill those two corpses. You've seen the heads of those two corpses. They were both wild general-level corpses, but he was able to kill them so easily. If such a dangerous person were to act against our people, it would cause unimaginable casualties. If we want to deal with him, we will have to pay an enormous price. It would be best if we let him leave and nothing will happen. The old woman sighed and said, How could I be willing to take such a risk? It's just that the Wilderness Divine Hall doesn't have much energy left. It can only supply us for about 10 years. After 10 years, this place will be in darkness and we will no longer be able to rely on the Wilderness Divine Hall to defend against the abyss desolate beasts outside. The only way is to find a new shelter as soon as possible. This person came at the right time. I have recently studied the information left behind by the outsider. The area we live in is called the Abyss region by the outsiders. Very few people can enter because the desolate beasts here are too strong. But outside the area they live in, the desolate beasts are very weak. Furthermore, they live in the Divine Wall. With the protection of the Divine Wall, they never have to worry about being attacked by desolate beasts. They can plant rice inside, making it a permanent shelter. We have to find a Divine Wall before the Wilderness Divine Hall's energy runs out. If not, the future 10 years from now will be unimaginable. Amelie was startled. Her small face had a hint of melancholy. She said, Elder sister, the last time you said to develop a new substitute for energy, is that not possible? If we leave this place and move to the Godly Wall, wouldn't it be too risky? The outsider from more than 100 years ago and this person are so powerful. How many people are as powerful as them in the Godly Wall? If we migrate over and a war breaks out, who knows how many people will die? The old woman was slightly silent. After a while, she said, The weak are prey to the strong. This is the law of this world. With the help of the Wilderness Divine Hall's power, we might have a chance to fight. But if we continue waiting like this, we will only become weaker and weaker until we completely perish. Amelie looked at her. Her eyes were slightly red and somewhat moist. Her small mouth was tightly pursed. The old woman glanced at her and gently rubbed her head. She said, Don't worry, we still have 10 years. We can first obtain the coordinates of the Divine Wall from this person and then send people to investigate the situation there. If it is suitable, we will migrate over. If it is not possible, we can migrate to other places. Living here is too difficult. Sister, do you want me to try him again? Amelie asked in a serious tone. The old woman looked at her and nodded. Dean left the small square. He pricked up his ears and listened to the cabin where the great priest lived. But he couldn't hear anything. The cabin door closed and the inside was completely isolated. He glanced at the huge statue on the square. He thought that there should be a corpse of the god of war here. Each corpse of the god was equivalent to the core of the giant wall. It was no less than the status of the imperial seal of a country in the old era. On the contrary, with the corpse of the god, he could build a new giant wall. Although the strength of the giant wall couldn't be compared with the giant walls of mysterious origin, but it should be able to resist the general monsters. However, he didn't have much interest in the corpse of the god. Instead, he was interested in the whole place, especially the place where the great priest lived. There should be a lot of weapons hidden there. If he got his hands on them, he could use them to kill Aristotle. If the halo is a lie detector, then they shouldn't be able to see that I have already guessed the effect of the halo. They should believe the results of the halo. Dean thought about how to build a good relationship with them. He wanted to get more useful information. For example, why didn't the god of war family live in the giant wall but in the abyss? Chapter 831. Look, it's the outsiders. Mom, do they come from the outside world? That sister is so beautiful. Stay away from them. Be careful of being attacked. A wilderness general brought Dean to the village. Along the way, many residents heard the news and came to watch. They stood in the distance and whispered. They were curious, excited, and afraid. Some of the older people frowned. Their faces showed disgust and hostility. Please. General Huang led the way for Dean. The other residents followed them all the way to a relatively spacious rough rock house. General Huang said to Dean, "You can live here for the time being. I'll send some living utensils to you. If there's anything you need, just tell me." Dean glanced at the house and nodded. "Thank you. Sorry to trouble you." "You're welcome. I'll go back if there's nothing else." General Huang said goodbye to Dean. Dean took Aisha into the house after General Huang left. The inside was almost as rough as the outside. There was a mat woven with weeds. Next to it was a stone platform. It seemed to be a table. There was nothing else. Dean felt regret as he saw the shabby appearance. 300 years had passed. Even if there was a fault in the civilization, at least they could rely on creation to restore a simple civilized society. After all, the greatest talent of human beings was creation. But this place only maintained the environment of primitive barbarians. He was disappointed. He took out a towel from his backpack and put it on the mat. He let Aisha sit on it to rest. He sat on the straw mat and quietly listened to the whispers of the residents who gathered outside. After listening for a moment, he found that the older people were hostile and wary of him. The young people and children were at a loss. They were just curious. It seems that after more than 100 years, they have forgotten about it. Only the older people know about it. It's convenient, Dean thought. The residents gathered outside the house for a few hours before gradually dispersing. Dean stayed in the room and did nothing. He was lying on the mat and quietly listening to the movements around him. He felt that the great priest would definitely send people to monitor him, and even use some technological items to monitor him. After all, the technology contained in the place where she lived was not inferior to the technology of the old era. Judging from the environment here, it was obvious that the thing was not made by them. They were just the users. Little dumb mouse, little dumb mouse. Suddenly, a tender voice interrupted Dean's thoughts. Dean could not help but sit up from the mat, looking at a small head peeking at the door. It was a girl about 7 or 8 years old. Her face was red and cute. The little girl saw Dean and slowly came out of the door. She asked, "Big brother, have you seen Silly Mouse?" Dean raised his eyebrows. "I haven't seen him." The little girl replied with an "Oh." She turned around and left dejectedly. Dean's heart moved. "I can help you find out. What does your silly mouse look like?" "Really?" The little girl turned her head and said, "It's like this. It's very small. It's very timid. It's hairy and gray. Its head is very small." Her description was a bit confusing, but Dean still understood that it was a small pet the size of a cat. His eyes flashed. He turned his head and glanced around. Soon he found something similar in size and shape. He smiled and got up. "I know where it is. I'll take you to it." "Really, big brother?" The little girl was very surprised. Dean stepped forward and took her to the corner of another rock house behind the house. In the corner, he reached out and grabbed a small gray fluffy thing. It looked like a mouse, but fatter than a mouse. Its ears were longer, like a rabbit. It looked cute and cute. Ah, it's a silly mouse. The little girl happily reached out and hugged it. Dean smiled and touched her little head. Little Jasmine, little Jasmine. Suddenly, an anxious voice came from the side. Dean turned his head and saw a middle-aged man running out in a hurry. The middle-aged man turned the corner and saw Dean. His eyes suddenly widened and he angrily said, You let go of me." Dean slightly frowned and put down his hand from the little girl's head. The little girl saw the middle-aged man and happily ran over. "Dad! Little Jasmine, are you okay?" The middle-aged man squatted down to check the little girl's hair and body. He was relieved to see that there was no wound. He turned his head and stared at Dean. "Outsider, I'm warning you. Don't get close to our child." The faint smile in Dean's eyes gradually disappeared. He quietly stood up and looked at the middle-aged man. The little girl pulled the middle-aged man's clothes and looked up. "Dad, is he the outsider?" "He is not as fierce as you said. He helped me find the silly mouse." The middle-aged man was startled. He looked at the cute little animal in her arms and seemed to understand. He looked at Dean and frowned. He didn't say anything. He picked up the little girl and turned away in a hurry. He soon disappeared from Dean's sight. Dean narrowed his eyes as he slowly walked back to his house. It didn't take long for an acquaintance to appear at the door of the house. It was Prelay and his companion who had been saved by Dean. They were holding 2 stone plates in their hands. They were covered with a lid. There were a few grilled fish inside. Dean smelled the faint aroma of the fish. He sat up and said to the two, "Why are you here?" "Mr. Dean, I inquired about the place where you live. I know that you haven't eaten lunch yet. I specially brought you a few small fish. I don't know if it suits your appetite." Prelay smiled. He put the stone plate on the table and opened the lid. There were a few grilled bluefish. There were a few light blue scales on the surface. Duty thought that they had come at the right time. He said, "Since you are here, let's eat together. I also have a few questions to ask you." No, we have already eaten at home. The amount here is not much. If we eat again then it won't be enough for you and Miss Aisha." Prelay waved his hand and said. There was a trace of embarrassment on his face. Dean saw him and looked at the few small blue fishes. He understood that it was very dangerous for them to venture out to hunt these small fishes. It showed how important food was to them. Looking at Prelay's age, it was obvious that he was already married. He wasn't the only one who had the final say in the family. Fear of his wife seemed to be a thing that had never disappeared in the past 5,000 years. Dean didn't try to persuade them again. He also didn't reach out to catch fish. Instead, he said, "It's so dangerous outside. You are taking such a big risk to catch such a small amount of fish. What if you lose your life? Isn't it not worth it?" Hearing him mention this, Prelay immediately thought of his life-saving grace, and his face became even more embarrassed. He said in shame, "Speaking of which, it's all thanks to you that we could survive this time. We don't go fishing often, and usually only go once in a while, and we always go at the time that the great priest has calculated. Usually, when we go hunting at the time that the great priest has calculated, we rarely encounter any danger. This time, we were really unlucky, but fortunately we met you, otherwise we really wouldn't have been able to return." "The great priest can calculate the danger of hunting?" Dean was surprised. Prelay's eyes showed a pious color. "The great priest has inherited the will of the origami. She can predict the good and bad luck. She knows all kinds of things in the outside world." Dean was surprised. Didn't it mean that the great priest had a way to observe the situation around the outside world? Did she have a super detector or some kind of technological item? Dean's eyes lit up. He didn't ask about this matter again but turned to another question. "I see that the wilderness generals here are very powerful. Why don't you let them go out to hunt? Wouldn't it be more reliable and the harvest would be more?" Desolate is going to guard this place. If we run into some vicious desolate beasts that discover this place and sneak in, they'll be able to find out in time and kill them. Things like hunting are all left to us desolate hunting squads," Prelay said with a laugh. "Wilderness hunting team? That's right, people like us who specialize in hunting in the wild." There was a trace of pride in Priley's eyes. "Mr. Dean, I'm a captain of the wilderness hunting team." "It's a captain," his companion reminded him. Prelay stared at him. "A captain is also a captain." Dean saw the two joking and asked, "Are there a lot of people like you who go out to hunt? How can I join you?" Chapter 832. Earth Dragon Cave? Wild Worm? The former was obviously a place name, so there was no need to ask. But the latter made Dean curious. He thought of parasitic soulworm, but parasitic soulworms were hidden in monsters. He asked, "What is this wild worm? Is it difficult to catch?" With benefactor's skills, it would be easy to catch them. However, to a person who has never eaten a desolate worm, these little things are very dangerous. Although it is easy to catch them, these little things have all sorts of strange abilities. Some have a strong acid that can corrode protective glove. Furthermore, these little things have a common ability, which is to suck blood and parasitize. If they accidentally touch the body, they will drill into the body. This is very dangerous, and it is very easy to die. Therefore, daring to go to the Earth Dragon Cave to catch a desolate worm is proof of your courage," Prelay said with some pride. "If you don't even dare to go to the Earth Dragon Cave, then don't talk about going outside and facing those horrible wild beasts." Dean was surprised. Priley's words had exposed a lot of information. "Can you eat wasteland worms? You didn't eat the wild worms you caught, right? What kind of changes can there be in people who eat wild worms?" Priley's eyes showed appreciation. "Benefactor is really smart. Wild worms are a great tonic. After eating wild worms, your strength and physical strength will be greatly improved. As long as you eat enough, you can even become a wild general. But wild generals are people who have experienced hundreds of battles in the Earth Dragon Cave. Even people like us who have eaten wild worms to improve our strength are generally not willing to enter the Earth Dragon Cave again. These little things are too dangerous. Even if a wild general goes in, there is a possibility of death." Dean was slightly startled, but there was a huge wave in his heart. Eating wild worms can improve strength? Priley's physique was around the level of senior hunter. Did he eat wild worms to improve it? "You said eating wild worms. Is it like this?" Dean made an action of throwing something into his mouth. Prelay said strangely, "Yes, otherwise how can I eat it?" Dean was slightly dumbfounded. His heart suddenly had a strong interest in the wild worm. In his understanding of the giant wall of Sylvia, to enhance the physique, he must rely on the parasitic soul worm to inhabit the body. With the help of the parasitic soul worm, he could enhance his strength. Such an evolutionary system had been maintained since the end of the era of experimental witchers. No one had thought that there would be other evolutionary routes, especially Dean. His worldview was the old era of scientific and technological materialism, and he knew the limits of human physical strength. Even the world's strongest fighter, a muscle madman who trained every day since childhood, could only barely reach the level of a junior hunter, unlike a senior hunter like Prelay. Not to mention, these kinds of people often had the appearance of a monster with bulging muscles all over their body. With the help of magic marks to enhance his strength, the unknown magic marks made him reluctantly accept such a reality. But among the residents of the abyss, they could enhance their physique just by eating. Even if he ate the best delicacies in the world and the most nutritious comprehensive food, it might not have such an effect, right? How much can the human body absorb? The digestive capacity of the stomach is limited, and the excessive nutrition won't enhance the physique. Instead, it will only lead to 3 hyperglycemia. Dean thought in his heart. But from Priley's words, it didn't seem like a lie. Was the wild worm really so magical? If you want to become stronger, you can only go to the Earth Dragon Cave to find wild worms to eat? Dean asked Priley. Priley nodded. I've been there 3 times, so I'm the captain. My strength is much stronger than this guy. He's timid, so he's only been there once. But the Baron Generals are different. They've been there at least 10 times. Dean felt that another path of evolution had appeared in front of him. However, he didn't know whether this path or the Magic Mark's evolution system inside the giant wall was more perfect, or which one was harmless, or the end point of both was destruction. Why not let the Baron Generals catch more wild worms from the Earth Dragon Cave? Wouldn't it make a lot of people stronger? Dean asked this question. Priley was stunned. The number of wild worms is limited. Every once in a while, the Earth Dragon Cave will open. Some people want to catch more wild worms, but it's good enough to catch one. Moreover, these wild worms have a sense of each other. If you catch one, then the difficulty of catching other wild worms will increase exponentially. Other wild worms will sense your existence through their companions, and then stay away. They will even gather together to besiege you. There was once a greedy person who caught 3 wild worms, but he wasn't satisfied. As a result, he was surrounded by a group of wild worms. In the end, he only found his bones and clothes. Dean asked, "Can I go to the Earth Dragon Cave? The Great Priest invited me to stay here for a few days. I can join your hunting team and help you hunt." Of course. Priley was happy. With your skill, even if you don't go to the Earth Dragon Cave, you are more than enough to join our hunting team. The Earth Dragon Cave will open in more than a month. If Benefactor wants to go to the Earth Dragon Cave, then you can apply to the Great Priest. After all, Benefactor is an outsider. I don't know if the Great Priest will agree or not. More than a month? Dean's eyes lit up. I'll give it a try. Speaking of which, do I need to apply to the Great Priest to join the hunting team? You don't need to. Priley laughed. If Benefactor wants to join, then you can do it now. I'm the captain. I can let Benefactor directly become a member of our team. But it's a bit of an injustice to Benefactor. It's a small matter. The companion reminded him again. Priley glanced at him. Dean smiled. It's not an injustice. My identity is sensitive. I'll stay here for a while and then leave. It's good that I can help you a little. The position doesn't mean anything to me. Benefactor doesn't plan to stay for a long time? Priley asked. Dean shook his head. I'll see. Priley understood and didn't ask any more questions. Remembering that he hadn't eaten the fish on the plate yet, he hurriedly said, Benefactor, please eat the fish first. We've been chatting and it's getting cold. Please enjoy your meal, Benefactor. We'll be heading back first. If there's anything you need, you can find me at number 21. Dean nodded. The houses were engraved with numbers. It wasn't difficult to follow the numbers. Dean looked at the blue fish after they left. He missed the days when Noyce was by his side. However, from the reaction of Priley and the Great Priest, it seemed that they wouldn't poison the fish. Chapter 833. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. Dudian spent most of the time in his own house during these 5 days. The people in the village seemed to have gradually become accustomed to his existence. Many villagers were warned by the elders, but their curiosity still drove them to come closer to peek at Dudian. As a result, they found that Dudian seemed to be completely different from the fierce and brutal image described by the elders, so their courage slowly grew. Some children often came to play outside Dudian's residence. At first, they were called back by their parents, but later nothing happened, so the children were allowed to play here. For the past 5 days, Preet would send food to Dudian every day. At first, it was blue fish, but later the number of fish sent gradually decreased. In the end, only some strange leaves and fruits were sent. Dudian knew that most of the people here ate these fruits as food. The soil here was seriously radioactive, so it was impossible to plant them. These edible fruits were plants that they had tried for hundreds of years. They were transplanted into the village, but there were not many of them. Therefore, even the light fruits were very precious. Most people could only eat some boiled watergrass and bark. Dudian occasionally wandered around the village. Everywhere he went, he would attract the surrounding residents' hostile gazes, but he didn't care. After 5 days of contact, he found that the population in the village was not large. A total of 400 or 500 people were spread out around the temple where the great priest lived. Most of the villagers couldn't have children because of radiation, especially the members of the hunting team who often went out to explore. Therefore, women and children were extremely precious here. In this highly scarce situation, there was an unimaginable marriage between a maid and many husbands. In this kind of absurd marriage, there was still the existence of love. For example, Preet, who often came to deliver food to Dudian, shared his wife with 2 other men. In this case, he still loved his wife deeply. He also thought that his wife also loved him deeply. Both of them were in love with each other. Moreover, he was not jealous of the existence of the other 2 people. Instead, he was good friends with the other 2 people. Dean felt that his worldview was completely destroyed when he knew about this. However, he thought about the dangerous environment and ferocious monsters that he had encountered along the way. It was extremely difficult and unimaginable to survive in such an environment for more than 300 years. In such an absurd environment, this absurd marriage and love was born. Dean had a special feeling every time he saw Pu Linley happily talk about his wife. Adaptation was a terrible thing. When you get used to it, you can no longer judge right from wrong. But in the final analysis, the standard of right and wrong was only based on the worldview that you have long been accustomed to. As a cliché saying goes, no one can see their own mistake. No one knows that they are a clown. In addition to this strange marriage system, Dudian found that the residents here seemed to have some leisure and hate work. In addition to the hunting team, other old people and women stayed at home all day long, in a daze, playing simple games to pass the time. It seemed that no one thought about improving the environment and no one thought about creating anything. After asking a few people, Dean knew that they were counting on the Grand Priest. In their minds, the Grand Priest was an omnipotent existence. He was the apostle appointed by the desolate god, and he had the power of a god. Because of this, many people had lost their desire to struggle. After all, they only needed to ask the Grand Priest to answer their questions. Why would they waste their time thinking about it? It made Dean think that a good leader may not be able to bring out a group of outstanding talent. However, there were also environmental factors. In this sealed underground world, their range of activity was very limited. Over time, people became lazy. Dean was familiar with the atmosphere of this place. His physical strength had reached the bottleneck of the peak of the Dominator level. Even if he injected more God Serum, he wouldn't be able to reach the level of the Abyss. However, there was no limit to the improvement of combat skills. Dean was able to get the secret combat skills of the Dragon Clan, the Wing Clan and the Rock Clan because of his rights as a Wall Lord. The Dragon Blood skill of the Dragon Clan, the Diamond Body of the Rock Clan and the Lightning Wings of the Wing Clan were all very practical combat skills. Benefactor. Pooh Riley carried the stone box and trotted to the outside of Dean's house. He excitedly rushed in and saw Dean crawling on the ground in a strange posture. He laughed. "Benefactor, are you exercising?" Dean stood up from the ground. He didn't blame Pu Lilei for not knocking the door. "Why are you so happy?" Pu Lilei grinned. "The Grand Priest said that we can go to the Blue Fish Lake at dawn tomorrow. There won't be any danger." "Is that so? That's good. We can catch more this time." Dean faintly smiled. He had asked Pu Lilei to take him out to hunt in the past few days. He wanted to rely on the harvest to quickly establish a friendly relationship with the village. However, Pulile refused because it was too dangerous. Now he could finally go out and get some fresh air. Yes, Pulile excitedly said. This time we can definitely catch a lot. I'll go back and prepare a bag. Benefactor, I'll come to you in the evening. Let's meet at the tunnel. Meet? Dean asked. Are there others? Yes, I heard that Benefactor's strength is extraordinary. Many people want to join us and go to the Blue Fish Lake with us. Pulile laughed. I saw that the situation of their families was not very good, so I agreed. Anyway, the Grand Priest said that there will be no danger as long as there are no more than 20 people. So in addition to us there are 18 people. Oh okay. Dean nodded, but there was some helplessness in his heart. The Grand Priest said that there would be no more than 20 people, but there were exactly 20 people. Then it's settled. I'll go back and prepare now, Pulile said excitedly. Dean nodded. After Pulile left, he opened the stone box. There were 2 small blue fish inside. He hadn't eaten this fish for 2 days. He thought that tomorrow's departure would be a big harvest, so he took out all the fish he had. I don't know how it tastes when I catch the thing at the bottom of the lake. Dean thought of the horrible monster fish in the depths of the lake, and his eyes flashed slightly. Since he intended to perform well and establish a friendly relationship with these villagers, this time he naturally couldn't be ordinary. However, if he caught it with his own strength, it would inevitably cause some people to be wary. Even among these people, it was likely that there were spies arranged by the Grand Priest who deliberately used this matter to test his strength. I used the dragon blood technique to suppress the reaction of the heat source. They should not know my specific strength. They can only speculate from the 2 undead. At most, they think that I'm at the pioneer level or even the inner wilderness. It seems that it is necessary to hide my strength. Dean's mind turned. If he wanted to fish while hiding his strength, then he could only use tools. Chapter 834. The night came. Pulile came to Dean's door with a spear. He invited Dean to go to the tunnel. So early? Dean was surprised. From the pocket watch he was wearing, it was less than 6 o'clock at night. There were still more than 10 hours before dawn. Wild beasts will come out to hunt at night. It's not suitable to walk in the tunnel. So we have to go to the tunnel in advance and rest there for the night. Pulile explained. Dean thought for a moment. I have an idea that can double our harvest. But we need to prepare some tools. I don't know if you have them here? Pulile's eyes lit up. Double the harvest of fishing? Benefactor, what tools do you need? A strong rope. I want to weave a fishing net. The interest in Pulile's eyes instantly disappeared. He smiled bitterly and said, Benefactor, do you want to use fishing nets to catch them? It's useless. We have already tried this method. The fish in Blue Fish Lake are carnivores. Their teeth are sharp and can easily bite through the fishing net. Dean shook his head. Weaving a fishing net is not for catching fish but for trapping fish. You will know when the time comes. Do you have a ready-made fishing net here? Trapping fish? Pulile was puzzled and said, The nets are ready-made, but they are not used to catch fish. They are used to trap small wild beasts and are kept by other hunting teams. If Benefactor wants them, I can borrow them. However, if they are damaged, we will have to compensate them. Dean heard that Pulile was worried about the safety of the fishing net. He didn't say much. Go borrow it. I will compensate if it is damaged. Seeing his confident look, Pulile asked doubtfully, Benefactor, is the method you mentioned really effective? It should be. Dean didn't say anything. Yes, there are still 18 people. Let them wear digging tools if they don't have a spear. Don't bring spears? Pulile was stunned. Going out to hunt without weapons but digging tools? Was he trying to dig a hole to bury himself? Dean saw his strange expression and could guess his thoughts. He said, Believe me, it's useless to bring a spear. All of you should bring digging tools. Also, borrow a large fishing net. Benefactor, this. Prelay was a bit hesitant. After all, it wasn't easy to go out hunting, and this was a rare opportunity. It would have been fine if he had gone alone, but the problem was that there were 18 other people with him. Behind these 18 people were over 10 families, and they had to carry the rations of the children and elderly of those families. If they went out and didn't gain anything, then the days ahead would be very difficult. Benefactor, it's not that I don't trust you. I'm just worried that others might not be willing to do this, Prelay said tactfully. Dean saw his dilemma. If someone wants to bring a spear, then let them bring it. If others bring digging tools, then let them bring fish bags. If there is no accident, then there should be a bumper harvest. All right. Prelay smiled bitterly. If Dean hadn't saved him, he wouldn't have bothered to listen to his nonsense. Going out to hunt without a spear, how could he expect a big harvest? It would be good if he didn't come back naked. An hour later, Prelay came to Dean with the borrowed fishing net. There were 3 or 4 strong men with him. All of them were carrying shovels, hoes, and other digging tools. Prelay saw Dean waiting at the door and quickly came over. Benefactor, I've borrowed the fishing net. But be careful when using it. They said that if it's damaged, you have to compensate them at least 30 fish. Dean glanced at the fishing net. It was woven with bark fibers and vines. The net was very thick, but it could be used to hunt monsters outside, so it was considered delicate. He pinched the fishing net. He was satisfied. He asked, "Where are the others?" "They are waiting for us outside the tunnel." Prelay looked at the faint lights on top of the village. It's getting late. Benefactor, should we go now? All right. Dean nodded and went back to the house. He took Aisha out. Let's go. Miss Aisha is going too? Prelay was surprised. Dean indifferently smiled. I won't separate from her. Prelay didn't ask any more questions. He called the people behind him to carry the fishing net and set off. It didn't take long for them to come to the tunnel outside the village. They saw more than a dozen people standing in front of the tunnel. Most of them were carrying spears in their hands. They were carrying a small basket on their back. They were waiting in boredom. More than a dozen people looked over as they saw Dean and Prelay. Their eyes fell on Dean. They were full of curiosity. A few of them had vigilance and indifference in their eyes. Dean didn't care as he walked over. Everyone, this is Mr. Dean. My benefactor. Prelay introduced Dean to everyone. Everyone looked at Dean but didn't speak. The atmosphere was a bit awkward. Prelay knew that Dean's identity was sensitive. He lightly coughed. Everyone, it's getting late. Let's go to the tunnel. Old Ray, are you really going to bring only shovels and no spears? One of the middle-aged men frowned. Prelay looked at him and then at Dean. We don't need a spear. If you want to bring it, then bring it yourself. Old Ray, if we don't get anything, then you will have to eat grass for a few days. The middle-aged man reminded. Prelay shook his head and waved. Get ready to go. The middle-aged man looked at Dean. There was a trace of dissatisfaction in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. This time Prelay was leading the team. He just needed to ensure that he wouldn't return empty-handed. Everyone entered the tunnel one after another. Not long after, they arrived at the entrance of the tunnel that was blocked by rocks. They saw 2 desolate generals standing guard here, and at the entrance, other than them, there were actually 2 groups of people. Each group had about a dozen people, and at this moment they were sitting in 2 piles, sleeping on the ground. Dean glanced at the 2 groups of people. They were carrying a lot of tools. There were hunting nets, huge wooden frames, spears, swords, and other weapons. With great familiarity, Prelay came to another empty space and called for everyone to rest. Dean asked him about the 2 groups. Prelay explained in a low voice. They are the 3rd and 5th hunting teams. They are mainly hunting small wild beasts in the southern part of the wasteland. It has nothing to do with us. Dudian was curious, so he asked a few more questions. He learned that the hunting areas of the hunting teams were different. For example, Prelay was mainly responsible for the Blue Fish Lake. The reason for such a division was that the Blue Fish Lake was first found by Prelay's grandfather. So the great priest divided the Blue Fish Lake to him. Now it fell on Prelay's head. Others who wanted to go to the Blue Fish Lake had to join Prelay's hunting team. Prelay would get 1/10 of the prey they hunted. Dean was surprised by such a regulation. It was quite a perfect contract. He didn't expect that it would be implemented in such a backward and poor place. But it did improve efficiency. "Hey, old Ray, are you going to hunt tomorrow?" A middle-aged man about the same age as Prelay walked out from one of the group. He seemed to be very familiar with Prelay. He smiled and said, "You've brought so many people this time. Are you preparing for something big?" Prelay laughed. "Of course not. How are your preparations this time?" "What preparation? No matter how good the preparation is, we have to rely on the heavens to eat." The man smiled and glanced at the crowd. His eyes stayed on Dean for a moment. "I heard that you brought the outsider to hunt together. Isn't he very strong?" Prelay said grumpily, "Definitely several times stronger than you. Haha, he can easily kill the dead. He is indeed stronger than me." The man laughed. Dean glanced at the two. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. He was waiting for tomorrow's hunting operation. Time passed quickly, and when it was 8 or 9 o'clock, everyone fell asleep one after another. Light snores rose and fell in the tunnel. In the darkness they didn't know how much time had passed until a rough voice called out, "Wake up, it's time." Dean woke up from his light sleep. He opened his eyes and saw that the others were also waking up. The one who spoke was the wilderness. The rock at the entrance of the tunnel had been pushed open. Prelay also woke up. He patted the people who were still sleeping and pulled everyone up. "Get ready, we are going." Everyone quickly packed up their things and followed Prelay out of the cave. In the blink of an eye, 3 groups of people went to their respective hunting site. The sky was bright. Glimmers of light shone from the clouds. Dean smelled the unique humidity and freshness of the early morning in the wilderness. He felt that all the pores on his body were slightly stretched out. His consciousness was extraordinarily clear. He held Aisha's hand and followed Prelay. They crossed the woods and walked for a while until they came to the Blue Lake. The lake was as calm as a mirror. It was a beautiful blue lake. Everyone's eyes lit up as they saw the blue lake. They couldn't wait to go forward and fight. Dean sniffed the air. He smelled the residual smell of blood in the air. He saw a few messy monster paw prints in the distance. It seemed that other monsters had come here in the past few days. It seemed that they had experienced a fierce battle. It seems that this water source is a good place to attract monsters. Dean thought in his heart. At this time, Prelay came to Dean's side and asked, "Benefactor, we have limited time. We only have 2 hours. What are you going to do?" Dean knew that time was pressing. He didn't want to be long-winded. "Go to the shallow water where you caught fish last time. Listen to my command and dig a deep pit. We will lead the fish to the pit we dug. Finally, we will concentrate on fishing." Prelay was at a loss. After all, he didn't even bring a weapon. He could only listen to Dean's command. He turned and gathered everyone. They came to the shallow water where they had caught fish last time. He looked at Dean. "Where do we dig a pit?" Dean pointed to the shallow lake and said, "Make an opening here and dig a pit here. Everyone start digging immediately. Dig the pit 2 meters deep and extend it to here. About 10 meters. Prelay looked at Dean's gesture. Although he had never thought of this method, but from Dean's gesture, the feasibility was extremely high. He immediately called everyone. "Everyone get ready. Follow Mr. Dean's instructions." Then he took the shovel to the lake and quickly dug the soil. The others looked at each other and followed him to dig the soil. The other 7 or 8 people with spears saw the actions of Prelay and others. They looked at each other and were at a loss. They didn't know whether they should help or wait. Soon, the middle-aged man who had previously reminded Prelay took the lead and left. He came to another foothold near the shallow lake. He took the spear and stabbed the fish into the water. Soon he got one and put it in the basket. The others saw that he had a harvest and immediately surrounded him. They found a foothold in the shallow water and used spears to stab the fish. There were as many small blue fish in the lake as there were hairs on a cow. When they saw someone approaching, they all gathered around the lake. Some of the small fish jumped up and bit the tip of the spear, their small mouths full of sharp teeth. Dean looked at them but didn't say anything. His eyes swept to the center of the lake from time to time. He was wary of the terrifying fish lurking to attack them. At the same time he came to the side of the woods. He used a sword to cut the trees and cut them into small wooden sticks. He used them to prop up the fishing net into a long basket. After a moment, the deep pit that Dean had pointed out was dug. Everyone had a hunter's physique, so the efficiency of digging the pit was very fast. Benefactor, what about now? Prelay wiped the sweat from his forehead as he glanced at the people on the other side of the lake. There was a trace of heat and tension in his eyes as he asked Dudian, "Put the fishing net here." Dean gestured for him to put the fishing net horizontally into the deep pit. Several people worked together and soon the fishing net was fixed in the pit. Dean took the shovel from Priley's hand and quickly dug out the middle of the pit and the lake. The lake water slowly flowed into the deep pit. But the blue fish were attracted by the few people. Only a few small fish flowed into the deep pit along the lake water. Dean swung his sword and stabbed into the lake water. He picked up a small blue fish. His wrist slightly turned and the sword quickly cut the small fish into several pieces. Blood flowed out. He threw the pieces into the middle and the end of the pit. It didn't take long for the stimulation of the bloody smell to attract all the small fish in the lake. The lake was boiling and the small fish kept jumping. As the lake water flowed, the small fish quickly rushed into the deep pit. It happened that the mouth of the fishing net in the deep pit was aimed at the mouth of the lake. All the small fish rushed into the net and swam towards the depths of the net. In less than a few minutes, the fishing net in the 2 meters deep and 10 meters long pit was filled with blue fish and lake water. There were at least hundreds of thousands of small fish in the net. Prelay and several other people who were digging the pit saw the scene and stared at it in disbelief. Dean saw that the time was almost up. He said to Prelay, "Block the mouth of the lake." Prelay came back to his senses and hurriedly called for the people beside him to go forward with shovels. They shoveled the soil from the pit into the mouth of the lake and filled it up. The lake water stopped pouring in. The pit was full of fish and lake water. Dean asked Prelay to continue to dig at the end of the pit. Dig deeper and let the lake water flow out. Prelay understood as soon as Dudian said it. The others were also enlightened. They picked up the shovel and started to dig the soil. They felt that their blood was boiling. Soon, they worked together to dig a small pit. The water in the pit quickly flowed out and was absorbed by the soil. The fishing net in the pit quickly sank. There were only struggling blue fish in the net. Dean looked at the time. Only an hour had passed. He estimated that he could make another net. So many. Prelay looked at the blue fish struggling in the net due to the lack of oxygen. His eyes widened in excitement. The others also looked straight at it. They swallowed their saliva. They felt like they were in a dream. Dean said, "Get ready to pull the net out. We'll make another net and then we'll go back." Prelay was stunned when he heard Dudian say that he wanted to make another net. He subconsciously said, We don't have enough bags." Chapter 835. Old Ray, how is the harvest here? One of the people who had been catching fish by the lake noticed the excited expressions on the faces of Prelay and the others who were surrounding the deep pit. Feeling that it was strange, he walked over with his spear in hand. Prelay turned to look at him. His eyes fell on his basket. There were a few small fish gently bouncing. Bien, the harvest is good. Bien grinned. Just as he was about to say something, his gaze was suddenly attracted by the scene in the deep pit in front of him. He opened his mouth slightly and stood rooted to the ground. After a while, he turned to look at Prelay with a face full of disbelief. This was all done by you just now? Did you do it last night? Prelay laughed. The others also laughed. They were particularly excited. At first they were worried that they wouldn't be able to catch anything with shovels, but this novel way of hunting gave them unexpected surprises. The fish in the pit was enough for them to live for many days. Dudyan wanted to catch another net. They felt unprecedented happiness and excitement. Oh my God! Bean's eyes widened as he exclaimed. The people who were fishing by the lake in the distance heard the commotion and walked over curiously. Soon, a series of exclamations rang out. All the people who were fishing opened their eyes wide and were tongue-tied. Dudyan frowned as he saw the blue fish struggling in the net. He didn't expect the fish to be so fierce. They could persist for so long even if they were dehydrated. He looked at Prelay. Tell everyone to open a hole in the back of the net and prepare to collect the fish. Put them in the mud and be careful not to be bitten. At the moment when Dudyan spoke, everyone pricked up their ears to listen. Dudyan didn't wait for Prelay to agree. Someone called out, "I'll do it! I'll do it too! Count me in!" Prelay laughed as he saw everyone's enthusiasm. He immediately assigned them to go behind the deep pit net. Due to the low terrain, the fish slipped out of the net and fell into the mud below as soon as the gap was opened. Several people stood in the mud and scooped up the fish with shovels. They threw them to the side of the shore. The others waited at the edge of the pit and immediately swatted or knocked out the fish that were thrown up. Then, they put the fish into bags and baskets. A few people at the side saw them collecting the fish wantonly and were extremely envious. They felt like a piece of delicious food was exuding a tempting fragrance in front of them. Some of them also bent down to pick up the fish with their baskets. Noticing that a few of the fish catchers were also picking up the fish, Prelay shouted, "You guys, didn't we agree earlier that you could catch your fish and we'd catch ours? Why are you picking up our fish?" As soon as he opened his mouth, the others who were working hard also noticed this and immediately shouted, "Yes! What are you doing? Why are you picking up our fish? We dug this hole and caught the fish. Isn't it inappropriate for you to pick them up?" The people picking up the fish felt embarrassed when they heard their protests and unkind gazes. One of them said, "There are so many fish. You can't fit them all. We all came out together. Why do you have to do this?" "What do you mean we can't fit it? Who said we can't fit it?" Someone immediately said angrily. Although the people present knew each other and could be regarded as acquaintances, but in the face of food they couldn't speak. The people who were picking up the fish knew that they were in the wrong, but it was hard for them to watch helplessly as they couldn't get a single one of the fish. The middle-aged man who had tried to persuade Prelay earlier said, "Old Lay, we're out hunting. You can't be so heartless. There are so many fish, and you're not giving us a single one. Isn't that too much?" Prilay's eyebrows twitched as he heard the words. "I told you to bring a shovel. Did you bring it? We were digging the soil and you were picking up the fish. If we didn't catch a single fish, would you share the fish with us?" The middle-aged man was rendered speechless by his words. Dean saw that they were about to quarrel, so he immediately came out and called out, "Old Lay." Everyone saw him speak and immediately looked at him. "Let them take the fish. We are all from the same village. There is no need to divide the fish," Dean said generously. Prelay was a bit unwilling, but they didn't listen to you and talked about you behind your back. They didn't put any effort to catch the fish. Dean slightly raised his hand to stop him. "Life is not easy. Give me face and give them my share. I can't eat so much anyway." "How can that be?" Prelay shouted as he heard that Dean was going to give up his share. The people who were picking the fish didn't expect that Dean would speak for them. Moreover, he wanted to give up his share. They couldn't help but feel grateful but also ashamed and remorseful. Old Lay. Dean looked at Prelay. Prelay saw that Dean was so determined. He sighed in his heart. Since you have spoken, as long as no one has any opinion, then let them have their share. I have no opinion. I have no opinion either. These fish are Mr. Dean's idea. Mr. Dean can divide it to whoever he wants. Would you agree if Mr. Dean said that he wouldn't divide it to you? The others laughed as they heard the funny words. The atmosphere suddenly eased. Hurry up and fill the fish, Dean said. Everyone knew that time was of the essence, so they clenched their teeth and worked hard. Those who were poaching the fish also helped out. Only when they were poaching the fish did they realize that the small baskets they brought were too small and could not hold much at all. Before they came, they thought that if they could fill one basket, it would be a great harvest. But now, it seemed that compared to Prelay and the others who brought large bags, it was nothing. Many of them regretted their previous short-sightedness. It didn't take long for the fish to be thrown out of the deep pit. Dean looked at the time and ordered Prelay to reset up the fishing net. Then he dug the edge of the lake. The water rushed in along with a large number of blue fish. Everyone was secretly excited as they collected the small fish on the shore and looked at the shoals of fish that kept pouring into the fishing net. The people who were picking the fish finally knew why they were able to catch so many fish. Compared to them picking the fish one by one, this fishing method was simply looting. Dean looked at the lake in front of him, paying attention to the appearance of the terrifying fish. However, when the net was filled with fish again, the terrifying fish still did not appear. His heart was relieved. This way, it would save him the trouble to do it himself. In the blink of an eye, the hunting time was coming to an end. Dean led everyone back. Everyone was carrying a full bag and fish basket. More than a dozen people were carrying the fish in the fishing net. The harvest was amazing. Back in the canyon, Prelay knocked on the rock and everyone returned to the tunnel. The two Baron generals were surprised to see the harvest. They couldn't help but look at Dean. They knew that such a terrifying harvest should be related to the outsider. After all, they had seen Prelay leading the team to catch fish countless times. But they had never seen such a huge harvest. Although the fish was very heavy, the atmosphere of the team was very happy. After entering the tunnel, one of them couldn't help but hum a song. The others heard the tune and sang together. In this way, they sang and sang back to the village. All the harvested fish were piled up in the square at the entrance of the village. Some children who were playing nearby were shocked when they saw it. The news quickly spread throughout the village and attracted a lot of people to watch. Dean saw the excited expressions of these people and smiled in his heart. This food didn't have much value for him, but it was the best tool to bring the relationship with the residents here closer. He felt that if he could catch a few more fish, he would soon become the existence of the people here. At that time, it would be very convenient for him to do anything. Old Lay, count the number of fish, Dudian said. Prelay looked at the amazed and envious eyes of the surrounding residents. He felt a kind of pride and honor. After hearing Dean's command, he felt a sense of enjoyment. He immediately ordered a few people to pour out the fish and began to count. In the process of counting, two groups of people came from behind the tunnel. It was the two groups of people who went out with them to hunt. One of them was carrying a 3-meter-tall monster that looked like a wild boar, humming a tune as it walked over. "Hey, Old Lay!" The middle-aged man who greeted Prelay when he was sleeping in the tunnel pushed away the crowd. He saw Prelay but didn't say anything. His eyes were attracted by the pile of fish in the open space. He couldn't help but stare dumbfounded. Prelay heard the shout and turned to see him. "Jesse, you are back. Not bad. The harvest this time is so big." Jesse recovered and couldn't help but stare at him. "Are you sarcastic? Did you catch all the fish in the lake? So many?" Prelay laughed. "If we really fished them all out, then there wouldn't be enough here." Jesse rolled his eyes as he looked around the square. He saw Dean's figure. Old Ray, is this outsider behind all of this? Prelay snapped. Don't call me an outsider. This is my benefactor, Mr. Dean. Jesse slightly curled his lips as he looked at the pile of fish on the ground. He was envious, but he knew that it was useless to look at it. He waved. Let's go and divide the fish. It didn't take long for the number of fish to be counted. There was a total of more than 1,800 fish. Prelay gave 500 fish to Dean, but Dean refused. He proposed to hold a fish banquet in the evening and invite the whole village to taste it since it was a big harvest today. Prelay heard that the whole village was invited to taste the fish. His heart was reluctant, but since Dean had opened his mouth, he was embarrassed to refuse. Moreover, he had learned Dean's method. In the future, when he went out to fish, he would have a big harvest. Metal Temple. After Amelie reported to the great divine priest, she pouted and said, "This person is quite powerful. He didn't use any martial arts at all, but he caught so many fish. I wanted to take this opportunity to see what he is capable of, but I didn't see anything." "I saw a lot," the great priest slowly said. "He is very smart and has an intention towards our village." "Smart is right. Sister, are you saying that he has an intention towards us?" Amelia was surprised. The great priest said slowly, "He's just a passerby. There's no need for him to be so kind to us. Amelie, you must remember that there's always a motive behind any unnecessary kindness. I don't think that a person like him, who dared to survive in such a dangerous place, would have the kindness of a child. So, he must have taken a fancy to us." "What will he see in us, sister?" Amelie asked her obediently. Chapter 836. 20 days passed in the blink of an eye. Dean stayed in the village all day. In addition to exercising, he ate, drank, and rested. There was very little entertainment here. Most people's habit was to eat and sleep. After all, sleep was the most energy-conserving thing. Parents supported their children to do the most. But such a phenomenon was undoubtedly a slow death. Since the end of the fish feast, Dean had not left the village. Prelay and others had looked for the great priest several times, but the answer they got was that it was not suitable for hunting, which made them quite disappointed. After all, it was not easy for them to learn Dean's fast fishing method. But after more than 20 days, they didn't have the opportunity to go again. Such a long interval was rarely seen in the past. Fortunately, there were still a lot of fish left after the fish feast. It was enough to sustain them for 1 or 2 months. After all, they had other sundries to eat. Dean wasn't anxious and waited quietly. He could guess the great priest's thoughts. She was worried that his relationship with the villagers would be too close and threaten her existence. Soon, it would be the day when the Earth Dragon cave would open. Dean felt that it was time to meet the High Priest again. In the past 20 days, the High Priest hadn't taken the initiative to find him, and he also hadn't taken the initiative to find the High Priest. Although they hadn't met, but Dean could roughly guess her thoughts. Now it was time to talk face to face. He came to the small square in the center of the village. He looked at the metal ball that was fishing in midair. Every time he saw it there was a kind of amazing feeling. The contrast with the rough rock houses around it was very clear. Dean said to the general in front of the stairs, "I want to see the great priest. Trouble me to inform her." The general looked at Dean indifferently. He went up the stairs and whispered in front of the cabin door. There was a light sound from the cabin. The general understood and came in front of Dean. "Please." Dean nodded slightly. This time he didn't bring the demon hunting tool, so naturally he didn't need to disarm himself. He stepped on the stairs and came to the cabin door. The cabin door slowly opened. It was still luxurious and bright inside. Dean went in and saw Amelie, who was standing in front of the curtain. "Mr. Dean, how are you living here?" Amelie looked at Dean with a smile. Dean indifferently said, "The environment here is average, but the people are good. Mr. Dean really knows how to talk. Of course, our place can't compare to the divine wall you live in. Amelie chuckled. Dean glanced at her and looked at the great priest. Greetings, great priest. Mr. Dew, you don't have to be so polite. The great priest smiled. Dean stared at the great priest's eyes. Great priest, I came here today because I have something to ask of you. The Earth Dragon Cave will open soon. I'm quite curious about the Earth Dragon Cave. I want to go in and talk about it. I hope the great priest will allow me to do so. The smile in the great priest's eyes slowly faded. Mr. Dean, what do you mean? There's no overtone. That's what I mean. Dean looked at her. The great divine priest frowned and said, Mr. Dew, are you here for the Earth Dragon Cave? Great priest, I know nothing about the Earth Dragon Cave. I heard from the villagers that the wild worm can enhance one's strength. Who doesn't want to get such a thing? Is there anything more attractive than power in this world? Dean said calmly. The grand priest stared at him and said softly, Could it be that your lover is not as attractive as your power? Dean replied, She is priceless and can't be measured by anything. Strength can be pursued. It's a vulgar thing. What a vulgar thing. The great priest sneered. You finally couldn't stand it after more than 20 days. Dean quietly looked at her. I just want to see if the wild worm is useful to me. If the great priest feels embarrassed, then forget it. I've been here for a long time. If you don't have a way to restore my lover, then I won't continue to waste time here. Goodbye. The great priest and Amelie were startled. They didn't expect Dean to leave so quickly. Amelie quickly said, Wait. Dean was relieved to see her timely reply. He intended to stay for a while and wait for them to persuade him to stay. If they didn't, then it would be embarrassing. Fortunately, the situation was as he wished. What? Dean looked at her. Amelie turned to look at the great priest behind the curtain. The great priest frowned slightly. After a moment of silence, he said, Mr. Dean, you have been here for so long. It is a bit unreasonable for you to leave just like that. What if your companions are attracted after you leave? Wouldn't that put us in danger? Dean indifferently smiled. There was a hint of mockery in his tone. Great priest, according to what you said, I can't stay or leave? The great priest's eyes lit up. It's not impossible if you want to enter the Earth Dragon Cave. But I have a condition. Say it. Dean generously said. It seemed that he was waiting for her to speak. His attitude made the great priest uncomfortable. She said, Mr. Dean is from the God's Wall. I have some interest in the God's Wall. I hope that Mr. Dean can tell me. Dean indifferently said, Of course, no problem. The great priest frowned as she saw Dean agree so readily. She felt uneasy in her heart. But before she could speak, she heard Dean say, Does the great priest want to migrate the people here to God's Wall? His words were like a thunderclap that exploded in the great priest's ears. The grand priest and Amelie were shocked as they stared at Dean in a daze. Dean knew that his guess was correct as he saw Amelie's change in expression. His heart was full of confidence. Mr. Dean, you are right. The great priest quickly calmed down and slowly said, We have lived here for hundreds of years. Although the resources are poor, it is still safe. If we move to another place, the journey will be long and we will suffer heavy casualties. You don't have to worry, we have no interest in moving to the God Wall. We just want to know how many powerhouses like you exist in the outside world. Dean faintly smiled. If it was an average person, he would really believe these words, but he had already seen through the situation here. The resources here were more than barren. The severe radiation had sterilized a large number of men who went out to hunt. As the number of women decreased, the number of children would also decrease. Sooner or later they would die out. It must be known that the speed of human reproduction was not slow. After hundreds of years of reproduction, there were still less than 1,000 people left. Especially with the distorted view of marriage here, the population was still unable to increase. It could be seen how fast the speed of extinction was. In his opinion, the population here would shrink by more than half in less than 30 years. In another 50 years it was estimated that they would face extinction. It would be good if more than a dozen people survived. It was impossible for them to not predict such a situation. A safe living environment was more important than anything else. Although this place was safe, but the serious radiation infiltration was irresistible. In the 20 days I've lived here, ever since I learned from Prelay that the earthworm cave will open in a month, I've wanted to go take a look. That's why I've insisted on staying here. Dean seemed to be talking about insignificant things. He said lightly, "When I have free time, I think that I want to go to the Earth Dragon Cave to have a look. So, why did you let an outsider stay here? What's the purpose of it?" Now I probably know the answer. Chapter 837. Did you expect it? That's why you dared to come to us? The great priest coldly stared at Dean. She didn't want to continue to hide anything from Dean. Dean indifferently said, "I've been waiting for more than 20 days. I've guessed that you have an intention towards me, but I don't know what it is. I didn't know until you asked me about the God's Wall. I don't think it's a problem. The God's Wall is very vast and most of the territory is uninhabited. Moreover, the environment here is heaven. It can accommodate all of you." Great Priest's eyes lit up. "How do I know if what you said is true or false? If I didn't tell you in the beginning then, I would have guessed your thoughts. Would you be more willing to believe me?" Dean sneered. "I can pretend that I don't know anything and answer you foolishly. Then you will spend time to guess. What's the point of that? What you are looking for is to move to the God's Wall. It's a very, very, very small thing. It's like a bug flying into your village. No one will notice it. Of course the metaphor isn't appropriate, but it's the fact." Amelia was shocked as she looked at the great priest. According to Dean, the territory of the God's Wall was unimaginably vast. The grand priest's expression was indifferent. "It's not like I don't know anything about the divine wall. I know that the territory there is vast and the divine wall is extremely tough. It can withstand the invasion of the majority of wild beasts. Tens of millions of people can live there. However, what I want to know is what kind of world the divine wall is like. Is it a world where the weak are prey to the strong?" Dean chuckled. "It seems that any world is like that. Isn't it the same here?" "Presumptuous." Amelie's eyebrows rose. "We are not like that here. We are very peaceful. There has never been a war. There is no war because they are tamed. They don't have greed." Dean faintly looked at her. "If another girl appears in the village and replaces your position, then she will be the goddess and you can only be an ordinary villager. Will you be willing to eat the same bad food as them? If you are not satisfied, what will you do? There is no war here, but the weak are still the servants. You are the rulers." Amelia gritted her teeth. I won't." Dean shrugged his shoulders. Great Priest coldly stared at Dean. It had been a long time since someone spoke to her with such an attitude. She was angry, but she knew that Dean carried the hope of their continuation. She thought for a moment. "In some sense you are right. But the law of the jungle has different distinctions. Some are naked and some are hidden in the dark. Which one is it in the wall?" "The second one," Dean said without thinking. He knew what the great priest was worried about. If the first one was the law of the jungle, then there would be no benevolence and justice on the surface. It would be no different from the monster world outside the giant wall. It would be the most inhumane world. It meant that the strong could burn and loot unscrupulously. There would be no order and rules to speak of. The law of the jungle was a cruel rule that couldn't be erased. In a sense, there was a distinction between the human society and the animal world. Although this was often said to be hypocritical, but it was the biggest difference between humans and animals. In the animal world, one would become prey if one didn't have enough strength. In the human world, one would be swallowed if one didn't have enough wisdom. The great priest nodded. It made her feel a little relieved. She could see that Dean wasn't lying. Moreover, the possibility of the first one was low. She asked, "Can you tell us the location of the wall?" Dean said, "You won't be able to go even if I tell you. It's a long journey and I've gone through many hardships to come here. Monsters are rare in the area around the wall. Generally people like Prelay can hunt there at any time. The number and strength of monsters are much higher in the farther places. As for the furthest place, it's the area where you live. We call it the Abyss. It's usually forbidden to enter." Amelia was surprised. "Is it because the wild beasts here are more powerful?" "Yes." Dean nodded. "No one will come here unless they are courting death. We usually hunt in the wasteland outside the Abyss. The area inside the wall is vast, so we don't need to hunt for sustenance. We rely on growing crop. The reason why we hunt is to expand the area. We hope that one day we can eliminate all the monsters in the world. Then only we humans will be left, and we can go anywhere we want." Naturally, this point was replaced by his own expectations and wishes. The reason why the witches were hunting was because of the needs of the Monster Research Institute and also the needs of the Kingdom of God. Eliminate all the monsters? Amelia knew that the monsters Dean was talking about were the wild beasts. Her eyes lit up as she heard Dean's words. There are so many monsters. Can we really eliminate all of them? It would be great if the origami were still here. If that was the case, we might really be able to travel to any place in the world like what you said. Unfortunately, we humans can only hide here. These wild beasts are too strong and there are too many of them. They reproduce very quickly. There's no way we can kill them all." At the end of her sentence, her eyes dimmed and her face was filled with frustration. "Although the task is difficult, but we don't know if we don't do it. After all, we humans used to be the rulers of the world." Dean's eyes flashed with a trace of passion. Amelia was surprised. "We were the rulers of the world? How is it possible? Why is it not possible?" Dean looked at her as if it was a matter of course. The great priest stared at Dean and slowly said, "You are right. We humans were the strongest race in the world before the catastrophe. But since the death of the origami, the status of humans has ceased to exist. I hope that there are surviving origami in this world that will lead us to the strongest." Dean slightly raised his eyebrows as he thought that this had nothing to do with the origami. But from her words he could see that they didn't know much about the things before the catastrophe. Otherwise they wouldn't put the origami in such a high position. He did not continue to delve into this problem, and changed the topic. "After I go to the Earth Dragon Cave, regardless of whether the desolate worms there can increase my power, I will tell you the location of the Divine Wall. However, it is still okay for you to hide here and live. If you move, with so many people, the number of people who can reach the Divine Wall alive will not exceed 5, or even all of you will die." "No." The great priest frowned. "You have to tell us the location of the God's Wall first. You can't go even if I tell you." Dean helplessly emphasized. The great priest coldly said, "How do you know that we can't go? We will find a way to get to the God's Wall. Even if we can't think of a way, then the next generation will be able to find a way to move to the God's Wall." Dean saw that she was so stubborn. He thought that it wouldn't be a problem for them to go to the wall. There was more than enough space to accommodate them. Even if there was any conflict, it would be solved by Aristotle. He said, "Okay, I'll draw the route to the wall for you. But I can only draw half of it for you. I'll draw the rest for you after I come out of the dragon cave." Amelia was angry. "Are you worried that we will break our promise?" Of course. Dean didn't think about it. Amelia was so angry that her eyes rolled out. She stamped her feet but didn't know what to say to Dean. The great priest calmly said, "That won't do. What if the route you draw is wrong? Won't we suffer in vain? It seems that we can't trust each other." Dean frowned as he felt the problem. Trust was a problem. Moreover, their ancestors had eaten the loss of outsiders. It was difficult to build trust. The great priest also saw the problem. He pondered for a moment and said, I have an idea. You take Amelie back to the divine wall first. After you finish this, Amelie will write a letter for you to bring back. That way there won't be a problem. Dean frowned. It was a bit of a waste of time. After all, he had experienced many dangers and wasted a lot of time. It would take several months to go back and forth. However, it was the only way. What if he kills me? Amelia was nervous and worried when she heard that she had to leave with Dean. The great priest said, So, let Mr. Dean leave your lover here. When you bring back Amelie's letter, I will. No. Dean didn't wait for her to finish her words. He flatly refused. I won't leave her here. The great priest didn't expect Dean's reaction to be so intense. He frowned. She is just a corpse. We won't do anything to her. What are you worried about? Don't say any more. I won't leave her here as a mortgage. Dean's eyes flashed. His body exuded a murderous aura. The great priest knew that Dean was irritated. He didn't say anything else. Amelia wanted to jump up, but didn't expect Dean's reaction to be stronger than her. She stared at Dean. Can't my life be compared to hers? She is dead, but I am alive. Chapter 838. You! Amelia was mad. She had never been wronged like this. She wanted to say more but was interrupted by the great priest. Mr. Dean, do you have a better idea since this method doesn't work? The great priest saw that Dean was serious. Although the words made her feel sullen, but it was not the time to fall out with Dean. She could only endure her anger. Dean coldly looked at Amelia. He didn't think that the little girl was cute anymore. Since we can't trust each other, then the only way is for you to compromise. Amelia was angry. Why should we compromise and not you? Because this exchange is unfair to begin with. To be honest, there is no room for discussion. You can either reject or agree. Dean's face was indifferent and his tone was stronger than before. There was a bit of aggressiveness in his tone. I don't have to go to the dragon cave. For me, going there means that I have hope to improve my strength. I won't lose anything if I don't go. But you are different. If you don't move to the wall, then sooner or later you will be destroyed. How many years can you last here? 30 years? 50 years? This is a matter of life and death for all of you. But for me it's just a matter of improving my strength. What qualifications do you have to discuss with me about this exchange? The great priest and Amelia were angry. But the great priest was a bit surprised. He didn't expect Dean's attitude to change so fast. Previously he was kind, but now he was as tough as a stone. Mr. Dean, don't go too far. The great priest felt that he should save some face, so he said coldly, This is still our territory. Do you think you can walk out of here without our permission? You are using your life in exchange. Isn't it worth it? Dean sneered. Let's not talk about whether you can keep me here or not. Even if you can keep me here, I guarantee that not many of you will survive. You can try if you don't believe me. The great priest didn't expect that Dean wouldn't budge an inch. Her face slightly changed. There was a trace of regret in her heart. She shouldn't have mentioned Dean's lover. She didn't want to see this situation. She said in a cold voice, Mr. Dean, it won't be good for anyone if we fight each other. It will only make our human race die faster. I don't want to use the worst means to deal with you, but I hope that you won't bully people too much. I'm not bullying people. Dean saw her intention to compromise. He coldly snorted and said, You and I each take a step back. When I come out of the Earth Dragon Cave, I will draw the complete route for you. I can only guarantee that the route I give is absolutely reliable. In addition, I will also give you 2 pieces of news. The great priest's face turned ugly. It was tantamount to return to the original negotiation situation. But this time she couldn't refuse. Otherwise it would be equal to tearing off. I can tell you the first news now. Dean said in a cold voice. There is more than one God's Wall in this world. The God's Wall I told you about is called Sylvia's Wall. Not just one? The great priest's pupils constricted and his face was filled with shock. Amelie's eyes widened as she looked at Dean in surprise. What about the second news? Dean glanced at her. Aren't you too greedy to ask so much when you haven't paid anything? Amelia gritted her teeth in anger. But she knew that she had offended Dean, so it was natural for her to be targeted by him. But she was indignant in her heart. She had been defeated by a corpse. It was simply infuriating. The great divine priest slowly regained her composure. Her heart was still a bit shaken. She longed to be able to move to the God Wall and understand the general situation of the God Wall from the mouth of the outsiders from more than 100 years ago. However, she didn't expect that there was more than one paradise like this. Apart from feeling shocked, she also felt sad and angry. She felt sad because they were also humans, but they had lived in this desolate and barren land for hundreds of years. The great priest digested the news after a long silence. She looked at Dean. Okay, I agree to your conditions, but you have to swear that everything you said is true. Swear in the name of your lover. Dean clenched his fist. His eyes were full of killing intent. Do you like to self-destruct? The great priest's face slightly changed. It's just an oath. It won't hurt her unless what you said is a lie. This is a matter of dignity. Dean stared at her. Nothing can implicate her. If you want me to swear on my life, then I will completely agree. But you shouldn't involve her again and again. The great priest thought that it was because of his strong reaction to her that she believed that he wouldn't use her as an oath. But she knew that it was impossible as she looked at Dean's angry face. Well, swear in your own name. Too late. The killing intent in Dean's eyes gradually converged as he indifferently said, You can offend me and question me, but you shouldn't disrespect my lover. Now I've changed my mind. I won't give you the extra news. In addition, you have to apologize to my lover in person. What? Amelie's eyes widened. Apologize to her? How is that possible? We didn't do anything wrong. The great priest's face was full of anger as she felt that Dean had gone too far. Mr. Dean, do you have a guilty conscience? Dean coldly looked at them. Your ignorance will destroy your people. I gave you a chance, but you don't know how to cherish it. To be honest, I don't want to see this situation. But your ignorance has created such a situation. In that case, we have to bear the result together. She didn't want to see the relationship between the two sides break because she knew that she would have to pay a lot of price to threaten Dean. They had a good talk before, but all the factors changed when they talked about Dean's lover. She regretted it. She didn't think that Dean would put his lover in such an important position. It was even more important than herself. It was difficult for her to understand. But now she was the great priest. Naturally, she couldn't apologize to a dead body. Since you insist, then don't blame us for being impolite. The great priest gritted her teeth and signaled Amelie to get ready. Dean's eyes penetrated the curtains and saw her eyes. He sneered. You barbarians don't know how to be polite. Amelie, what does the great priest mean by reaching out to you? Amelie was about to attack Dean when she heard Dean's words. She was puzzled as she looked back. Did her sister have other instructions? Amelia felt her body lighten, and in the next moment, she was far away from the curtain. She felt a slender hand on her neck, strangling her throat. Her heart was cold as she knew that she had been fooled. You! The great priest was so angry that she stood up from the ground and lifted the curtains. It was reasonable to say that her identity couldn't be easily seen, but she had no time to care about it. She didn't know that Dean had seen her appearance through the curtains. You'd better stop. Dean indifferently looked at the great priest. Although I don't know what means you will use to subdue me. But no matter what you do, I guarantee that she will be buried with me before you make a move. The great priest knew that Dean was right. Not to mention her, Even the strongest great priest wouldn't be able to save Amelia from Dean's hands. After all, she couldn't be faster than Dean's finger. Not to mention that Dean himself was a top master. If he used the mechanism, then Amelie would be shot. She gritted her teeth and said to Dean, "If anything happens to Amelie, then you won't be able to leave alive. Don't think that you can do whatever you want by holding her hostage. Although Amelie is a goddess, but there are many goddesses who have sacrificed their lives for the sake of their clansmen. Amelie is prepared for this." Amelie's pale face calmed down as she heard the great priest's words. Her body was no longer trembling. Her bright eyes were full of courage. It seemed that she was ready to die at any time. Dean felt that the hostages calmed down. He looked at the priest. "That's why I decided to give you another chance." The great priest frowned. Chapter 839. "No," great priest flatly said. "Amelie can't go to the dragon cave with you." Dean raised his eyebrows. "Why?" "It's too dangerous. I can protect her." Great priest said. "You can't even protect yourself in there. How can you protect her? If there's really danger, will you risk your life to protect her or yourself? She is a hostage. What's in it for me if she dies?" Dean didn't answer. "If she loses her life in the dragon cave, then you can besiege me and bury me with her. So I will protect her even if it's for my own life. Unless you want to compete with me now. But I guarantee that she will die in front of me." Great priest's face turned ugly. "I can promise you that I won't attack you after you come out of the dragon cave. But you can't take her there." Now that things have come to this, is there any meaning to such verbal promises? Dean indifferently said, "I'm not familiar with the Earth Dragon Cave. It's good to have someone to guide me. In case you use some means that I don't know and wait for me to go in, then create danger in the cave. Wouldn't I be ambushed and killed by you in vain? We are not that shameless," Amelie angrily shouted. Dean pinched her chin with his fingers, deforming her face. Her mouth pouted and she couldn't speak. Great priest's face was gloomy. He knew that it would be difficult to change Dean's mind. The most important thing was that he didn't have a bargaining chip in his hand. Amelie would die if she refused Dean's proposal. But if she agreed, then it would be extremely dangerous for her to go to the dragon cave with her special body. The only advantage was that Dean would be buried with Amelie. She didn't need to go through her hands. There was some contradiction and hesitation in her eyes. "I'm willing to go." Amelie saw the entanglement and pain in the eyes of the great priest. She suddenly thought of the reason. She clenched her teeth and shook off Dean's hand. Amelie is a goddess. She should sacrifice herself for the tribe. Amelie is willing to take the risk. There was a trace of complex and guilt in the great priest's eyes. But it quickly disappeared. She didn't want Dean to see anything strange. She pretended to be in deep thoughts, but in fact she was adjusting her mood. After a moment she suppressed the sadness in her heart. She took a deep breath and looked at Dean. "All right, I promise you. But you have to release Amelie and give us the map of the wall." "Of course," Dean indifferently said. "I mean what I say. But you better not play any tricks." The great priest stared at him for a moment. "You better bring Amelie out safely. If anything happens to her, I will absolutely let you be buried with her." Dean was too lazy to listen to the nonsense. "You don't need to worry about this. There is still some time before the dragon cave opens. I want to know everything about the dragon cave so that the chances of me and your goddess coming out alive will be higher. You better tell me the truth." "I will naturally tell you." The great priest coldly snorted. "But I don't want the villagers to know about what happened here today. It's not a good thing for you. I hope you understand." "Of course I won't publicize it," Dean said. It was not good for him. The great priest wanted to keep it a secret because he was worried that the villagers would riot and cause unnecessary war. After all, the villagers couldn't tolerate the fact that he had kidnapped the goddess and was still living in the village. "If there is nothing else, then I will leave first." You can ask Huang to come and tell me about the dragon cave, Dean said. He didn't want to continue to stay here as he felt that his life would be threatened at any time. The great priest slightly frowned but didn't say anything. Her eyes turned to Amelie. Her lips slightly moved but in the end she didn't speak. Dean suddenly said, "In fact, we could have carried out this transaction peacefully. You wanted to go to the wall and I just wanted to go to the dragon cave. There wouldn't be much loss to either of us. But now it has become like this. It's a pity." The great priest looked at him. She also had the same thoughts but there was no way to reverse the situation. She said, "These things wouldn't have happened if you could trust us." Dean sneered. "Wouldn't it be the same if you could trust me?" But he didn't say it as it was meaningless to talk about it. He said, "Open the door." The great priest deeply looked at him. She raised her hand and knocked on the wall. The metal door slowly opened. Dean didn't continue to choke Amelie's neck. He put his palm on her shoulder. It seemed to be very gentle but in fact he was using his strength to remind her not to play tricks. Amelia fiercely stared at Dean. Dean pulled her out of the room and they went down the stairs. The two generals who were guarding the stairs were surprised to see Dean and Amelie come out together. One of them came forward and shouted, "Please take your hand away! How can you touch the goddess?" Dean didn't speak but glanced at Amelie. Amelie gritted her teeth, but she knew that she had to cooperate with Dean. She immediately said, "It's nothing. I'm going to Mr. Dean's residence to teach him the teachings of God. You wait for me." The two generals looked at each other and bowed their heads respectfully. They retreated to the side. Dean glanced at Amelie. She was very vengeful. She wanted to teach me? He exerted a little force with his fingers, and Amelia cried out in pain. When the two wilderness generals looked up in shock, he quickly hid the painful expression on his face and pretended to be calm. "Nothing, I just saw a disgusting bug." When the two desolate generals heard this, they hurriedly looked around in search of the disgusting bug she mentioned. Dean raised his eyebrows and quickly left. Dean closed the door after returning to his residence. He threw Amelie into the room. "Be honest for the next few days or you will suffer." "You." Amelia clenched her teeth in anger. But she knew that Dean wasn't a person who would have tender feelings for the fairer sex. She stood in the corner of the room with her back facing Dean. Dean looked at her position. "Stand in the middle. Don't leave my body for 2 meters." Amelie turned her head and said angrily, "Why?" Chapter 840. You! Amelia felt that she was going to explode. She had never met a person who made her so angry. Dean leaned against Aisha and sat down, silently calculating the next way out. Now he was in a deadlock. From this moment on, before entering the Earth Dragon Cave, and after leaving the Earth Dragon Cave, he would face ambushes and traps at any time. He could not relax for even a moment. In the blink of an eye, the night came. Amelia's stomach growled, "I want to eat." "Endure it and wait for them to bring it to you." Dean bit the roasted blue fish in his hand and slowly chewed it. Amelia gritted her teeth. "Don't you have food?" "This is mine." Dean frowned as he felt that she was a bit noisy. Amelia was more annoyed as she saw Dean's disgusted expression. But she knew that getting food from Dean was tantamount to a fool's dream. She was a goddess, so she gritted her teeth and endured. At night, a desolate general knocked on the door and delivered food and a book. "This is what the great priest told me to give to you." General Huang put down the things. "Your Highness, this is your dinner tonight." Dean nodded slightly. After Huang left, he took the book and looked through it. However, Amelie quickly opened the stone basket and saw a few plates of exquisite meat dishes, exuding a tempting aroma. Amelia's eyes lit up as she looked at Dean. "Do you want to eat? This is much better than your broken fish. If you want to eat, then beg me and maybe I can give you a taste." She deliberately fanned the fragrance towards Dean. Dean didn't raise his head. "Don't be long-winded. Go to bed early." Amelia sneered. What? Are you worried that the food is poisonous? Coward! Whoosh! Just as she finished speaking, she felt her vision blur. Then, the stone plate in her hand disappeared and fell to the ground. I don't want to eat, but you can't eat either. Don't mess with me. Dean still didn't raise his head as he said. It seemed that the food had nothing to do with him. Amelia was slightly stunned as she looked at the food that was spilled on the ground. She wanted to pick it up but didn't. She fiercely stared at Dean. Wait till you fall into my hands, then I will make you beg for death. She no longer paid attention to Dean as she held the remaining plates of food and ate with relish. Dean was gradually attracted by the contents of the book. It was about the Earth Dragon Cave, including the date of the Earth Dragon Cave, the reason, as well as the appearance and characteristics of the wasteland worms inside. The opening date of the Earth Dragon Cave isn't a special day. It's just to restrict the villagers from entering the cave at will. It's to protect the worm and the villagers. Worm likes blood? How can there be blood in the cave? The worm in the outer layer of the Earth Dragon Cave is relatively weak, and the number is sparse. The deeper you go, the denser they are. The worm's strength is determined by the size. The bigger the worm, the stronger it is. There are some special cases. Although they are small in size, they are still very powerful. Such special cases can be distinguished by the color of the antennae. Yellow antennae are weaker and red antennae are stronger. Dean carefully looked at the book. Although it introduced a lot of useful information, it seemed that some key things were not explained. For example, what was the deepest part of the Earth Dragon Cave? Why would the worm live in the Earth Dragon Cave? Where did the worm come from? Why was the Earth Dragon Cave called the Earth Dragon Cave? Could it be that there was an Earth Dragon hidden inside? Dean didn't get the answer to the questions in the book, so he could only ask Amelia. The deepest part of the Earth Dragon Cave? I don't know. Anyway, there must be a lot of worm. Do you want to go to the deepest part? Don't court death. Amelia unceremoniously hit Dean. If you don't answer well, then you may not be able to eat for the next few days. Dean calmly said. Amelia stared at him. Don't you dare. But thinking about it, Dean really dared to do so. She quickly compromised. In fact, I don't know. I haven't been a goddess for a long time. There are a lot of things that I haven't learned yet. You can ask the great priest. Dean stared at her. 14 or 15 years old and you don't even understand these things. Do you think I'm retarded or do you think you are retarded? How can you talk like that? Amelia was angry. Dean looked at her and took back his eyes. Forget it. Anyway, we will know when we get there. Amelia was surprised. Do you really want to go to the deepest part? Dean turned around and ignored her. Amelia came in front of Dean and said in a serious tone, I advise you not to court death. If you want to die, then don't take me with you. Don't you want to verify whether the worm can enhance your strength? Why don't you catch a few small ones and eat them? Why go to such a deep place and take the risk? If we provoke the worm swarm, then both of us will be eaten. Dean turned again. I have a sense of propriety. Shut up and go to sleep. You. Amelia gritted her teeth in anger. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, it was time for the Dragon Cave to open. Dean had read in the book that the opening day of the Dragon Cave wasn't a special day. He could ask the great priest to open the cave for him in advance. It would save a lot of unnecessary trouble. But he wasn't sure if the information in the book was true or false. In case it was deliberately tempting him to do so, then he would fall into a trap. So to be cautious, he went in with the other villagers. I can finally see the sunlight outside. Amelie walked out of the house and stretched herself comfortably. During this time, she and Dean had been staying in the house, not even going out of the door. It was almost suffocating. Sunshine? The light is more like it. Dean said as he held Aisha's hand and put the other hand on Amelia's shoulder. Don't play tricks. Don't ask for trouble. Amelia felt awkward as Dean put his hand on her shoulder. She rolled her eyes but was too lazy to respond. She was used to Dean's cynicism these days. It didn't take long for two wilderness generals to come in front of them. "Your Highness, the great priest has asked you to come over." "Let's go," Amelia said indifferently. She restored the noble temperament of the goddess. The two generals frowned as they looked at Dean's hand on her shoulder. They didn't say anything as they slightly bent down and led the way. The Dragon Cave was located on the most remote hillside on the west side of the village. There were wooden stakes outside the cave. Each stake was connected to a rope which sealed the place. No one would come here on weekdays as it was regarded as a forbidden area. But today it was the most lively place. The open space outside the hillside was full of people when Dean and the goddess arrived. More than 90% of the villagers had come here to watch. "It's the goddess. The goddess has come. I heard that the goddess has been teaching the outsider for the past few days. I hope the outsider can understand the teachings of the goddess and be a good person. Get out of the way." Dean and Amelia's arrival attracted the attention of the crowd. The crowd immediately separated to make a path for Dean and Amelia to pass. Dean also put down his hand from her shoulder. Before coming here, he had whispered to her that if she played tricks, everyone present would be buried with her. Amelia naturally didn't dare to risk escape in such a chaotic place. She knew that she wasn't Dean's opponent. If she angered Dean, then he would indiscriminately kill the innocent villagers. That would be a great loss. "Benefactor," Prelay called out loudly from within the crowd. Dean nodded slightly as he saw Prelay. Prelay smiled as he saw the eyes of the crowd. He was quite proud of himself as he smiled. The villagers calmed down as Dean led Amelia and Aisha to the front of the crowd. But they were still whispering to each other. Other people who participated in the Dragon Cave frequently looked at Dean and Amelia. Chapter 841. Amelie. Great Priest came in front of Amelie and looked at her. "Pay attention to your safety." "I will." Amelie took a deep breath and a serious expression appeared on her face. She slowly stepped forward and said, "Let's go in." Dean looked at the Great Priest but didn't speak. He took Aisha and Amelie's hands and took the lead to enter the cave. Other villagers lined up and were ready to enter as they came to the front of the cave. It was dark inside the cave. The light from the top of the rock wall could not shine in, but Dean could still see the scene inside the cave through his night vision ability. The inside was full of rubble, and the rock wall was extremely smooth. It seemed to be the trace of mucus drying up. Dean let go of Aisha and let her follow him. He held the splitter in one hand and Amelie's shoulder with the other. He slowly walked in. It was extremely quiet inside the cave, but if one listened carefully, one could hear a very slight sound of friction. This sound was slippery and made one feel disgusted, as if something sticky was rubbing against one's body. He stared into the depths of the cave and could not see any heat source, but he could tell from the subtle sound that there was something not far ahead. He didn't dare to be careless as it was the first time he faced a wild worm. He used his X-ray ability to the extreme and soon saw that there were a few finger-long worms squirming in the rock wall about 70 or 80 meters away. The worm looked like a shellless snail. There was a smell of mucus under its body, and its whole body was smooth. It seemed that it didn't have any attack power. "Is this a wild worm?" Dean slowly walked over with Amelie. When they were about 10 meters away from the worms, they seemed to be alarmed. They raised their heads like vipers and turned to look at Dean's position. The next moment they crawled out of the nest. They crawled like caterpillars, but every time they crawled, their body was stretched to about half a meter. The speed of their wriggling was very fast. They would arrive in front of Dean in 10 seconds. Wild worms. There was a trace of panic on Amelie's face when she saw the worms wriggling over. She gritted her teeth and said to Dean, "Attack! Don't let them come close. They can spit corrosive fluid." Dean had read about the abilities of wild worms in the book. Spitting corrosive fluid was just one of their abilities. Different worms could spray different liquids. Some liquids could cause frostbite, some could corrode rocks, and some could stretch their body to entangle their prey like a snake, and strangle them to death. Dean looked at Amelia and said, "I'll leave them to you." She was not mentally prepared. After all, she had never been to the Earth Dragon Cave. She only knew about the appearance of the worm from the great priest. This was the first time she saw these ugly worms with her own eyes. As a girl, she had a natural fear of worms. If it was not for the mission in her heart, she would have turned around and run away. However, Dean was crazy enough to ask her to attack. She didn't have any weapons with her. Amelie's legs trembled as she looked at the worms wriggling closer. Dean raised his eyebrows as he saw her. He didn't expect that as a goddess she couldn't even deal with a few worms. Her fighting ability wasn't as good as an average villager. After all, Prelay had said that he could deal with 1 or 2 small worms at the same time. The ones in front of him were small worms. Amelie was scared as the insects were getting closer and closer. Dean no longer counted on her. He picked up a few stones from the ground and threw them out. The stones flew out almost at the same time, but they were aimed at several insects in different positions. All of them were hit. However, after the stones hit the worms, they quickly sank. 2 of the stones accurately hit the heads of the 2 worms, which were wriggling forward. Their heads were directly smashed, but the next moment, the stones sank into their bodies, and their heads quickly recovered and continued to wriggle toward Dean. Dean slightly raised his eyebrows. As the book said, ordinary physical attacks were ineffective against them. He stepped out and turned his wrist slightly. A few black lights appeared in the cave, and the worms that were squirming over were immediately cut off. At the same time, the 2 parts of their bodies were separated by Dean. In the blink of an eye, the 5 worms on the ground became 10. They were like snakes with a broken tail, jumping on the ground, but there was no blood flowing out of the wounds. "Go and catch them," Dean ordered Amelie. Amelie was relieved when she saw that the worms were severely injured by Dean. However, she still felt nauseous as she looked at their wriggling appearance. She suppressed the fear in her heart and took out a special jar from her backpack. She picked up a severed worm and quickly threw it into the jar. Then she closed the jar. She heard the jar in her hand as half of the worm was bumping into each other. She wiped the mucus off her fingers and returned to Dean with the jar. "It will die soon. Do you want to eat it?" "You eat it first," Dean said. He had learned about the method of using the worm from the books, Prelay and other villagers. The answer he got was very consistent. It was to wash and eat it directly. There was no need to pay attention to it. Eat it like food and then become stronger. I don't want to eat it." Amelie's face was ugly. Not to mention eating it. Even looking at it would make her scalp tingle. Dean coldly glanced at her. "Don't force me to grab a whole worm and stuff it into your mouth." Amelie looked at Dean's indifferent expression and shuddered. She knew that when Dean used this expression to talk to her, he would do what he said. This man was definitely not a soft-hearted person. She clenched her teeth as she felt humiliated in her heart. Time passed. The scattered worms on the ground were still bouncing in the same place. Some of them gently wriggled and crawled towards Dean. Dean used the tip of the knife to push away the worm that was crawling in front of him. He quietly waited for the worm in her hand to suffocate to death. Yes, the worm was not afraid of sword attacks. However, it was easy to suffocate to death. In this regard, they were similar to the vast majority of creatures on Earth. They had a high dependence on oxygen. After a few minutes, the jar in Amelie's hand gradually calmed down. "Eat it," Dean urged impatiently. Amelie's body slightly trembled. She hesitated for a moment and slowly opened the jar. She saw half of the worm at the bottom of the jar. It was motionless. Its body had returned to the size of half a finger. Her face was very ugly. She trembled as she stretched out her fingers to take out the worm. The sticky feeling from her fingers made her want to vomit. She instinctively wanted to look up and beg Dean. However, Dean's indifferent face flashed in her mind. She clenched her teeth and endured it. She closed her eyes and stuffed the worm into her mouth. In an instant, she felt that she was going to die. That taste, that feeling, it made her feel more pain than death. She chewed the worm's body. The worm's body split open. It was like the internal organs had ruptured. The taste was fishy and bitter. She felt her stomach churn. She couldn't bear it anymore and vomited. She bent over and coughed hard. She vomited all the fine meat that she had eaten before. The thing that she vomited exuded a sour smell. Dean slightly frowned and took the jar from her hand. He picked up another struggling worm from the side and threw it into the jar. He covered the lid and waited for the worm to die while waiting for her to recover. Your villagers risked their lives to get this thing. Now it is in front of you. You have to know how to cherish it. Dean said to her. How could Amelie not know that these worms were incomparably precious? However, eating them was worse than killing her. She really wanted to cry. At this moment, she even wished that she was just an ordinary girl in the village, because women did not need to come to caves. This was a tradition. Soon, she was tired and wiped her mouth. At this time, Dean handed her the jar. The worm inside was suffocated to death. Eat it. There was fear in Amelie's eyes. She looked at Dean but saw his indifferent expression. She clenched her teeth and tears filled her eyes. She trembled as she opened the jar and took out the worm. The stench hit her face and she almost vomited again. But this time she gritted her teeth and held back. She threw the worm into her mouth and chewed it quickly. This time she didn't chew much. She just chewed a few mouthfuls and swallowed the worm. The moment she swallowed the worm, she felt like she was relieved. Dean didn't say anything as he saw her eat it. He picked up another worm and threw it into the jar. Amelie felt like she was about to collapse as she saw Dean's action. She clenched her teeth and her eyes were full of hatred. After a few minutes, the worm inside the jar was suffocated to death. When Amelie was ready to take it, Dean directly opened the jar. He used 2 slender fingers to pick up the worm and threw it into his mouth. He chewed a few times and swallowed it. After eating, Dean didn't look at Amelie. He bent down and picked up another struggling worm. He stuffed it into the jar and said to Amelie, "The people behind us are coming. Let's go." Amelie was shocked as she saw Dean's calm expression. She subconsciously looked at the remaining worms on the ground. What about these? She regretted as she was afraid that Dean would pick them up and let her eat them. Let's leave them for the people behind us. Let's go inside and see. Dean said as he used a knife to push away the worms on the ground. Chapter 842. After walking for about 40 or 50 meters, Dean cut off 7 or 8 worms. These worms were gray in color, and only one of them was completely black. This black worm would spit out a corrosive liquid that could corrode rocks from afar. Soon, a fork appeared in front of Dean. Dean chose to go straight. The straight road was the path to the deepest part of the cave. The other road was opened up by the wild worm over a long period of time. Most of the villagers would go to the other road. For the villagers, as long as they could catch the wild worm, it was enough. Only a few arrogant people would take the straight road. They wanted to go to the deepest part of the Earth Dragon cave to take a look and prove their courage. After walking for more than 20 meters, Amelia suddenly groaned in pain. She squatted down and covered her stomach. Dean calculated the time in his mind. 5 or 6 minutes had passed. It should be time to see the effect. Generally, eating the worm would take effect in about 5 to 10 minutes. Amelia curled up in pain. Her body trembled slightly. After less than 10 seconds, she calmed down and quickly stood up from the wet ground. She was surprised to see her hands. Dean noticed that the heat in her body had increased a lot. At first, Her body was no different from an ordinary person. But in a short time, it had reached the level of a primary hunter. This surprised him. Was this little goddess really just an ordinary person at the beginning? Was she not deliberately hiding the heat? If this was the case, then the benefits brought by the worm were too strong. However, he remembered what Prelay and the other villagers had said. Eating a wild worm for the first time was a very painful experience. The pain would last for half an hour before disappearing. Only then would one's strength increase. Only by consuming it multiple times would the effect shorten. In the later stages of eating wild worms, the pain would only last for a few minutes, but Amelie only lasted about 10 seconds. The difference was too big. Haven't you eaten this thing before? Dean narrowed his eyes. He suspected that Amelia was pretending, but thinking of the vomiting reaction when she ate the worm, he felt that it was not the case. Unless the girl's acting was Oscar level. Amelia shook her head as she heard Dean's words. She was about to answer when she realized the reason behind Dean's question. She frowned and bowed her head in silence. Dean raised his eyebrows. You'd better answer my questions. Otherwise I don't mind letting your body have more intimate contact with these insects. Amelie's expression changed. She gritted her teeth and said, You're so evil. Be careful that you don't fall into hell. That's after death. You don't have to worry about it. Dean narrowed his eyes. Most people won't be able to take effect so quickly unless you have taken it many times. Or you are a goddess. Although I don't know why your village selected you, but there should be some differences between you and ordinary villagers. You better be honest, or I will strip your clothes and bring the bugs to you. Let the bugs taste the blood of the goddess. You! Amelia's body trembled as she heard Dean's shameless words. Her face turned white and red. Yes, I'm different from everyone else. So I can digest the worms faster. Are you satisfied with this answer? What's the difference? Dean asked. She wanted to keep the secret, but now it seemed that it was impossible. She raised her head and looked at Dean. I'm the child of the origami. I have the blood of the origami in my body, so I can easily digest these worms. Moreover, I'm not afraid to tell you that these worms are very interested in my blood. Bringing me here is your biggest mistake because the worms will smell my scent. The deeper you go, the more worms you will encounter. You might even encounter a tide of worms. Dean nodded. Amelie was angry and wanted to stomp her feet. She wanted to keep the secret, but now it seemed that it was impossible. But she wasn't afraid that Dean would abandon her. After all, they were not far from the entrance of the cave. Dean was startled. Child of origami? Was she a descendant of the war god's family? He couldn't help but look at Amelia. The war god's family was more than 10 meters tall. Their lower body was distorted, but Amelia's height and appearance was no different from a normal person. If you are the child of origami, then what is the great priest? Dean stared at her. Amelia snorted. Of course I'm also the child of origami. Dean narrowed his eyes. Since you are the children of origami and your digestive ability is so strong, why haven't you eaten a worm before? If you want, you should be able to become the strongest person here. Amelia's face changed. Dean's question was too sharp. Although Dean's question might be unintentional, but if she answered honestly, then it would expose a lot of things, including the weakness of the great priest. Her eyes flashed. I'm the goddess. Even if I'm not the strongest in the village, everyone has to respect me. Why should I eat these disgusting worms? Really? Dean stared at her eyes. The goddess was also looking at Dean. Time seemed to stop at this moment, but Dean didn't blink. His sharp eyes seemed to pierce into the depths of her soul. Amelia's heart pounded as she looked at him for a long time. She slowly turned her head. It's up to you whether you believe me or not. Dean deeply looked at her. I have a guess, but I don't know if it's true or not. You said that it was your first time eating a worm, and I believe it. But the reason why you didn't eat it before is not because it's disgusting, but because you didn't want to increase your strength. because the stronger your physique is, the stronger the smell will be and the greater the attraction to the worms. At that time, the worms won't stay here. That's why you didn't increase your strength. From this point I can guess that the Great Priest is different from you. She isn't the child of Aragami. Otherwise, why is she the goddess and the Great Priest? Amelia's heart turned cold as she listened to Dean's words. Everything was correct. She didn't expect that Dean's speculation would be completely correct. Dean was basically sure as he saw her reaction. His ability to read people's expressions had been tempered to perfection in the giant wall. Amelia's acting skills weren't Oscar level. After all, she was just a teenage girl. Although her mind was much smarter than the average person, but she didn't have much experience in this small village. The child of Aragami. Your ancestor should be a combination of human and Aragami? Dean speculated again. Amelia's body trembled because Dean was right. She looked up at Dean and saw his dark eyes. She felt as if she was completely seen through. She asked, "How do you know?" This secret wasn't a big deal, as she was powerless to argue. Your mind doesn't look like a person who has lived for decades. From this point of inference, your age and appearance are consistent. The Aragami has been dead for hundreds of years. Your father gave birth to you, which means that your father was a human. But you are still the child of the Aragami. It can only mean that you have half of the Aragami's bloodline in your body. From this it can be inferred that your ancestors were a combination of the Aragami and humans. Dean said. Amelia was startled. She felt that it wasn't difficult to speculate her identity after hearing Dean's word. She felt a little better in her heart, but she was still angry that Dean could see through so many of her secrets. She gritted her teeth. Who said that I haven't lived for decades? How much older are you than me? Humph. You have to call me brother even if you are 1 year older. Dean no longer paid attention to her angry words. He turned his head and looked around. He felt a faint movement coming from the front of the cave. Something was slowly approaching. Most likely it was a worm. She was about to move forward when she found that she had overlooked one thing. Chapter 843. Dean raised his arm and looked down at his body, feeling the changes in his body. Time passed minute by minute. After waiting for about 2 minutes, he still did not feel any changes. His face slightly changed. He was surprised. Could it be that the wild worm was ineffective on him? Or, his physique was much stronger than Amelie and the other villagers, so the small wild worm had no effect on him? While he was thinking, suddenly, a burst of cold air spread out from his right arm. His frozen right arm suddenly seemed to awaken. Cold blood flowed through his arm and flowed into his body. It was so cold that he shivered slightly, as if he was in an ice cave. Dean's face slightly changed. He immediately stimulated his heart, using the dragon blood technique to speed up the heartbeat and enhance the blood circulation in his body. After a while, the cold air was slightly dispelled, but the cold blood that flowed into his body through his right arm had spread to his whole body. He felt his body temperature plummeting, and he was indescribably cold. He thought of the fate of Dragon Mother, and didn't dare to hesitate. He quickly opened his backpack, took out a bottle of white wine, and drank 3 mouthfuls. The difference between wine and water was that the wine was cold, but it was very hot when it entered the body. The alcohol burned in Dean's throat and chest, bringing bursts of hot feeling, which dispelled a lot of the cold air in his body. At least he wouldn't shiver and his nerves wouldn't tremble. "What's wrong with you?" Amelie saw Dean's abnormality and asked in astonishment. Dean gently shook his body, using the resonance of his muscles to generate heat. His face was gloomy, and he didn't pay attention to Amelie's words. His heart gradually sank. His right arm wouldn't attack unless it was in an extremely cold environment. Usually, under his careful control, his right arm would move normally, but now it suddenly attacked. The only change was that he ate the wild worm. In other words, the wild worm would cause the cold air in his right arm to attack. He didn't know the reason, but he didn't feel any increase in strength in his body, which was enough to confirm his judgment. For them, eating the wild worm can strengthen their physique, but I ate it, and it almost caused the ice blood disease to attack. Will this trip be in vain? Dean suddenly thought of something and said to Amelie, "Wait here, I'll be back soon." Then, without waiting for Amelie's reply, he turned and ran away. Half a minute later, he ran back. Amelie's visual visibility was extremely low in the dark cave. Even after eating the worm, she could only see less than 2 meters around her. Moreover, it was a vague shadow. She felt a sense of security when she saw Dean appear again. She secretly felt that she was ridiculous and pathetic. "Where have you been?" she asked. Dean automatically ignored her question. "Let me ask you. Do the people in your village have the bloodline of origami? Or should I say, in these hundreds of years of reproduction, their ancestors had married someone with the bloodline of the origami?" Amelie was startled. She frowned and said, "Why do you ask? Yes or no?" Dean stared at her. His ears slightly moved as he turned his head. The faint movement he had heard before was getting clearer. 50 meters away from the corner, more than a dozen wild worms were crawling towards him. There were 2 wild worms mixed in with them. Dean believed that Amelie could hear the sound of the wild worms, so he said in a cold voice, "You better answer honestly." Amelie saw the naked threat in Dean's eyes. She was angry and aggrieved. "If you say yes, then so be it." It seemed that his speculation was correct. Most of the ancestors of the villagers had a marriage with Amelie's ancestor. That was the offspring of the origami. This marriage had led to the appearance of a close relative marriage. He had learned about the strange marriage system from Prelay. At this moment, he had confirmed that the villagers were basically regarded as a family. Their bodies more or less had the genes of the origami. Amelie should be regarded as the orthodox descendant of the origami. The other villagers were just a branch. This was the only explanation that made sense. Why Amelie and the villagers could increase their strength after eating the wild worms, but he couldn't. He had left to check if the people who came in later had picked up the wild worms that he had cut off. The result was that all the wild worms were gone. This confirmed his speculation. However, he still couldn't figure out why his right arm would be stimulated even if he couldn't increase his strength after eating the wild worms. What would be the reaction of an outsider who ate the wild worms? Or would there be no reaction and it would just fill the stomach? Amelie saw that Dean was silent. She didn't know if her words had exposed something. She carefully looked at Dean. "What's wrong with you? Are you stupid?" Dean recovered and looked at her. "I remember that you said that the deepest part of the cave is the body of the origami, right?" Amelie was startled. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to take a look," Dean said. He had given up the plan to continue to catch wild worms to enhance his strength. This trip was in vain. He had been delayed in the village for more than a month. Moreover, he had kidnapped the little girl and offended the whole village. However, since it was like this, he was not afraid to offend them further. He couldn't go back empty-handed. If he could find the body of the origami in the deepest part of the cave, then it would be a big harvest. At least, the body of the origami was also an extremely precious and rare existence. If he could get the body of the origami, it would mean that he could get rid of the giant wall of Sylvia. He could choose any place in the wilderness and build his own shelter. This shelter was completely his territory. Even the kingdom of God wouldn't be able to find him. It was convenient for him to do a lot of things. Even if he didn't have the energy to build such a shelter after he got the body of the origami, he would continue to hide in the giant wall. But the body of the origami would be infinitely valuable. At least this level of things was enough to make the big shots of the kingdom of God jealous. After all, the other giant wall had sent people to seize the body of the origami. Let's go. Dean held the sword and strode forward with Aisha. Amelie's face was ugly. Do you want to die? The deeper we go, the more insects there will be. I know you have the ability, but you can't stop the swarm of insects. If I die, you won't be able to get out of here. You can try if you don't believe me. Use your life to try? I don't mind, Dean said without looking back. Amelie was almost choked to death by his words, but her body was very honest. She followed closely behind Dean for fear of leaving her body. Before entering the Earth Dragon Cave, she was ready to die together with Dean. But after seeing these twisted and hideous worms, she was a little afraid. She shuddered at the thought of being bitten to death by these worms. So now her mind was very chaotic. Instinctively, she followed Dean, still planning to find an opportunity to hit Dean hard. Dean rushed to the front of more than a dozen wild worms and quickly slashed with his sword. His figure flashed like a phantom. More than a dozen wild worms didn't have time to spit out corrosive liquid and freezing liquid before their bodies were cut off. At the same time, their soft bodies were slapped against the rock wall and slid down. Dean went forward without looking back. Follow me if you don't want to die. If I can't protect you, then you will become a snack for these insects. Amelie's face turned ugly. She knew that they were still on the periphery. Once they went deeper, they would have to face more worms. Sooner or later, Dean wouldn't be able to take care of her. Sacrifice, glory, sacrifice, glory. Amelie clenched her teeth as she cheered herself up. Chapter 844. About 50 meters into the cave, they came to a corner. Dean looked forward but still couldn't see the end of the cave. The cave in front of him was densely packed with wild worms. All of them were like dogs that smelled a strange smell. They wriggled out from the crevices and the ground. They raised their heads like snakes and looked at Dean and Amelie. The wild worm was like an earthworm. There were no eyes on both ends, only a round hole that looked like a mouth. It looked disgusting, especially when these things looked at him in groups. It was disgusting and horrifying. Amelia's face turned pale as she subconsciously hid behind Dean. She saw Aisha standing next to him on the right side. Although she knew that Aisha was a corpse and didn't know fear, but a strange feeling emerged in Amelie's heart. The next moment, all the wild worms left the nest and swarmed towards Dean. Their originally finger-length bodies were stretched to half a meter long. They wriggled forward in a bow shape. Their speed was slightly faster than an ordinary adult's walking speed. When they were 4 or 5 meters in front of Dean, a wild worm raised its body and sprayed transparent mucus from the round hole in front of it. The speed was extremely fast. It was like a water gun shooting towards Dean. Dean quickly rushed up and avoided the transparent mucus shooting. He picked up the wild worm and cut its body. Although it couldn't kill them, but it could limit their movement. According to Prelay and the books, the simplest way to kill a wild worm was to cut its body in half. If it was cut horizontally, it wouldn't die on the spot. Instead, after a long time, the wound would heal and the two parts of the body would slowly grow into 2 wild worms. However, in order to cut it vertically, the twisted body of the wild worm had to be straightened and fixed. Although Dean didn't need to fix the body of the wild worm, he could cut it in half with his knife skills. But he needed to concentrate and waste more time. So directly cutting off the body was the best way. Soon, Dean opened a path among the wild worms. He shook the bell and let Aisha follow him. Amelie didn't need Dean to say more. She quickly followed behind Aisha. Dean went all the way forward. Everywhere he went, there were broken bodies of wild worms on the ground. "How deep is it?" Dean asked as he walked and killed. Amelie looked at the half-insect that flew around her from time to time. She was so nervous that her face was pale. "I don't know, but I heard that it's very, very deep." Dean slightly frowned. At this time, he continued to go nearly 50 meters deeper. The number of wild worms in front of him was increasing. Some rock walls were covered with a layer of dense wild worms. When they were motionless, they would even think that they were part of the rock wall. But when Dean came, they slowly wriggled and woke up. It was like the front of the rock wall was twisting. It looked exceptionally terrifying. In addition to the large number, the size of the worm was also a lot bigger. Dean finally realized how courageous it was for the ordinary villagers to come here to hunt the worm. Whoosh! A black worm jumped out of the rock wall like a viper and quickly wrapped around Dean's thigh. It slithered up towards his crotch. Dean quickly raised his hand and pulled it down. He threw it into the cave behind him and continued to move forward. Hiss! Among the worms, several snow-white worms quickly swam toward Dean. They were not arched but twisted like snakes. Their bodies were thick like baby arms, about 1 meter long and smooth. In the process of swimming, the front half of their body was slightly raised, and the soft tissues under their round body extended out, turning into 2 sharp blades. Like the arms of a mantis, they quickly swam toward Dean. Their speed was faster than primary hunters. Dean's face slightly changed. This should be regarded as a strong wildworm. Although the general wildworm was very strong and could spit out mucus that could corrode the body and armor, but after all, it was slow. Ordinary people could avoid it. But this kind of wildworm was like a killer. Ordinary people would die if they encountered it. What surprised him the most was that the body of the wild worm had changed. Its round body tissues could unexpectedly turn into sharp blades. Whoosh! Dean waved his sword and cut off several snow-white wild worms that were swimming towards him. In front of the Dominator level, the movement of these wild worms was as slow as a tortoise. Dean picked up a severed snow-white blade worm and said, "Open the jar." Amelie's face turned pale, but she quickly opened the jar in her arms. Dean threw the slightly twisting half of the worm into the jar. Amelie quickly covered it. Dean turned around and continued to kill. At the same time, he said, "Wait until it is suffocated. Then you can eat it." Amelie's face became uglier, but she knew that it was useless to argue. She could only hold the jar and firmly follow behind Dean. In the blink of an eye, they continued to go hundreds of meters deeper. At this time, Dean found that the number of wild worms he encountered had decreased. However, the size of the wild worms had increased. The gray wild worms that he encountered outside the cave had disappeared. The wild worms that appeared in front of him were as thick as an adult's arm. They were 1 meter long. But when they swam over, their round body was like a machine. 7 or 8 sharp blades suddenly appeared in the soft tissues. Some of the wild worms even had 2 short fleshy wings on their back. They flapped their bodies to fly. They were like dragonflies that were magnified hundreds of times. Dean waved his sword and quickly went forward to cut them into several pieces. Although the large wild worm was strong, but its speed was similar to the limitless. In front of him, it could only be regarded as a small monster. It's so deep. Dean stepped over the body of the worm. He was shocked in his heart. From the outside of the cave to here, he had walked about 200 meters. This distance was nothing, but if it was a 200-meter-high building, he could feel how long it was. Generally speaking, the caves of monsters were at most 30 meters deep. Whoosh! A wild worm was hanging upside down from the top of the cave. It fiercely spat out a mucus that hit the ground in front of Dean's feet. But Dean found that the mucus touched the rock in front of his feet. It quickly dissolved and collapsed, turning into a small pit. He was shocked. The speed of corrosion was too fast. Even the aqua regia from the old era wasn't so terrifying. Previously, the corrosive liquid spat out by the wild worm could only slightly corrode the rock, so Dean didn't care too much about it. But this wild worm was different. Dean recognized its appearance and rushed forward like a phantom, cutting it down. Dean cut it into 3 pieces. He picked the middle section and threw it to Amelie. "Eat it later." Amelie looked at the arm-thick section of the wild worm. Her face turned green. She had swallowed the white-blade wild worm that was suffocated to death. She didn't expect to eat such a big one. Dean continued to move forward. Barren worms popped out of the cave one after another and swam toward Dean. Dean quickly said. At the same time he was attacking, he also noticed that almost all the worms were rushing towards Amelia's direction. Although Amelia was standing behind him, the worm had no eyes and was aiming at Amelia. It seemed that Amelie and her clansmen could eat the wild worms to become stronger. The wild worms were also very interested in their meat. Dean walked along the winding cave and suddenly stopped. He saw that the inner wall of the cave had suddenly expanded to accommodate 5 or 6 people at the same time. But in the middle of the cave there was a sturdy dark wild worm. Dean's eyes narrowed. This was the biggest wild worm he had seen so far. There was no record of such a big wild worm in the books given by the great priest. The worm seemed to be sleeping. When Dean saw it, it seemed to smell something. Its body slowly moved, and the coiled end of its body lifted, looking at Dean's direction. Chapter 845. Dean looked at the slowly recovering worm and said to Amelia, "Stay here and don't move." Amelia was nervous as she saw that Dean was about to leave. It was dark here. She had eaten 2 worms and her strength had increased, but her field of vision was still limited to 3 to 5 meters. She didn't know what Dean had found. Dean carried his sword and rushed towards the worm. The worm was completely alarmed by Dean's action. It quickly untied its body. Its body was nearly 3 meters long. The round hole on its raised head suddenly expanded and split vertically from the inside, revealing a ferocious mouth full of sharp teeth. The mouth was slightly open, and one could see that the inside of the mouth was pitch black. The sharp teeth extended to the depths of the mouth. It seemed that the whole body was densely covered with sharp teeth. It screamed and quickly swam towards Dean. Dean narrowed his eyes and suddenly accelerated. He raised the sword in his hand and cut off the head that was about to bite him. He turned his wrist and lifted the sword in the opposite direction, cutting off the middle part of the body. After a few slashes, the body of the wild worm was quickly cut into several pieces. Although it was quickly solved, Dean's eyes were still dignified. This worm was extremely fast. It was faster than all the other worms he had met before. It was comparable to the pioneer level. He didn't know if this was the strongest worm here. If there were stronger worms in the depths, then it was likely to be at the inner wasteland level. Or even, there might be sovereign-level worms. He didn't dare to be careless. He turned to Amelia and said, "Come here." Amelia heard Dean's voice from the cave. She was relieved and immediately rushed forward. Soon Aisha and Amelia came to Dean's side. The difference was that Aisha was summoned by Dean with the bell. Amelia's face was very bad as she saw the huge worm that was still twisting on the ground. Her first thought was, how could there be such a big worm? Her second thought was, how could she eat such a big worm? Dean saw her eyes and said, "Do you want to try it?" Amelia quickly shook her head like a rattle drum. "Let's go." Dean continued to move forward. Not long after, the view of the cave suddenly widened. In front of him was a wide cave similar to the underground world. On the ground and on the wall, there were 4 or 5 wild worms that were as thick as the previous one. Dean was surprised. He told Amelie to wait for him in the same place and took the initiative to rush towards the worms. Several wild worms reacted quickly after being alarmed. They immediately hissed and rushed toward Dean. Dean's figure was divided into 3. His sword flashed and several worms that were rushing towards him were quickly dealt with. Dean was relieved, but his mood was a bit heavy. His previous guess seemed to be true. If he encountered a Dominator-level worm, then he would have to let Aisha cooperate with him on the premise of not getting injured. But this was the last thing he wanted to do. In the wilderness, getting injured would increase the chance of death to more than 70%. The cave was very wide. It was as if he had returned to the village world outside the dragon cave. The dome of the cave was more than 10 meters high. The surrounding rock walls were stained with viscous liquid. It was very moist. There were puddles on the ground, but the water inside was black. There were protruding sharp stone awls like bamboo shoot. Dean walked forward for more than 10 meters when he suddenly heard a rustling sound. He stopped and listened attentively. This sound was the sound of scales rubbing against the ground. But the sound was dense and numerous. He tried his best to look forward. Very quickly, a shocking scene appeared at the end of his vision. He saw a black mass of desolate worms surging out from the cave in front of him. They were like a school of fish in the water. There were many black backs, but looking closely, they were pitch black and thick desolate worms. Every one of them was the size of the huge desolate worms he had encountered before. There were even a few extremely large desolate worms that were 4 to 5 meters long. Dean's scalp tingled. He had encountered swarms of worms outside the tunnel. Because of Amelie's physique, he had encountered them several times. But those worms were small and medium-sized. Even if they were in groups, he could easily deal with them. But the wild worms in front of him were different. They were comparable to the existence of pioneers. Moreover, he didn't know what other special abilities these worms had, such as super-strong corrosive liquid or spraying poisonous gas. Run! Dean turned around and pulled Amelie to run. Aisha followed closely behind him. Soon, Dean retreated to the narrow passage outside the cave. The giant worms that he had cut before seemed to have mastered the method of movement. They were wriggling and crawling towards him, but their speed was not fast. Dean used his sword to pick them up and rushed into the passage. He was thinking of a solution as he ran. The passage was full of cut wild worms. Some were still bouncing and twisting on the ground. Some were dead. But when Dean passed by, they immediately raised their bodies and stretched towards Dean's feet. "Ah!" Amelie screamed. Dean looked at her and saw a snow-white worm crawling on her leg and wrapping around her thigh. Dean frowned and slashed with his sword. Amelie was scared and screamed again. But the next moment, she felt that her leg was loosened. The snow-white worm was cut into 2 ends, but her snow-white thigh was not injured at all. She breathed a sigh of relief and felt frightened. She did not expect Dean's knife skills to be so accurate. Dean turned his head and looked behind him. He saw that the group of giant worms were still chasing him. They poured into the narrow passage. Dean's face turned ugly. Would these worms chase him all the way out of the Earth Dragon Cave? He was thinking when he saw a group of small and medium-sized worms coming from the passage in front of him. They were the worms that he had cut off before. He didn't expect that in less than half an hour they would recover their ability to move. 2 groups of worms were attacking from the front and the back. Dean's face was ugly. Although the worms in front were small and medium-sized, so he wasn't afraid of them. But there were many of them. It would take time to clean them up. But the huge worm swarm was imminent. He couldn't wait any longer. Amelie didn't know what was going on. But when she saw the anxious look on Dean's face, she was frightened. She knew that the thing she was most worried about had happened. At the same time, she heard the sound of the wall being hit. The sound was louder than the previous worm swarm. It sounded like countless wild beasts were approaching. She could almost imagine some horrible pictures in her mind. Could it be that she was going to be buried here with him? There was a trace of bitterness and fear in her heart. This was the purpose of her coming here. Even if she couldn't let Dean die with her, she could still severely injure Dean. The great priest had already prepared to capture the seriously injured Dean and interrogate him for his secrets and the coordinates of God's wall. Chapter 846. Dean frowned. The best way to escape was to rush out with Aisha and leave Amelie behind to attract the huge worms. But if the worms ate Amelie and returned to the nest, then he would have to face the worms again. If he couldn't deal with the worms, then he wouldn't be able to get the remains of the origami. The thought flashed through his mind. He suddenly grabbed one of Amelie's arms and used the clean edge of the saber's hilt to slice off a piece of flesh. He threw it at the huge worm swarm behind him. Amelia was still in a daze and was caught off guard. The pain from her arm made her scream, and tears almost fell from her eyes. She said angrily, "What are you doing?" Dean didn't answer. He took out a match from his waist and quickly lit it. He tore off Amelia's sleeves and exposed her snow-white arms. He lit the sleeves. Amelia's clothes were very thin. It was woven with animal wool. It was very warm and easy to ignite. The sleeves were ignited before the match was finished. Dean quickly tore off Amelie's other sleeve. He took out a small bottle from his backpack and threw it to her. "Apply it on the wound to stop the bleeding. Quick." Amelie took the bottle. She was annoyed and amused at the same time. But she had probably guessed the purpose of Dean's action. She opened the bottle and poured out dark red powder. She smeared it on the wound and frowned in pain. Dean ignited the other sleeve, and then threw the half-burnt sleeve to the front of the swarm of wild insects. The flame was erratic in the passage, reflecting the shadows on the wall like swaying ghosts, and then fell in the middle of the wild insects. The flame was still burning, but the wild insects quickly dispersed, not daring to get close to the flame. Dean was relieved. Although there were no records in the books, but since ancient times, fire was the nemesis of all life. Humans relied on fire to survive. Using fire to disperse beasts was the knowledge of ancient ancestors. Although the worms were special and had strong survival ability, they were obviously afraid of fire. After all, even microbes with strong survival ability would be destroyed by high temperature. If they weren't destroyed, then it could only mean that the temperature wasn't high enough. Amelie used the light from the fire to see the swarm of wild worms in the tunnel ahead. They were densely packed like snakes. Her scalp went numb and her face turned green. She even forgot the pain in her arm. Dean noticed that the huge worm swarm stopped and started to gnaw on the piece of flesh that he had thrown out. The worms swarmed forward and plunged into the center of the fight. They were like a group of black tentacles. He opened his backpack and took out 2 black stones. He rolled his burning sleeves towards the black stones. Amelie didn't understand Dean's behavior. "What are you doing? Take off your clothes," Dean ordered. Amelie was stunned. Her eyes widened as she said, What did you say?" Dean looked at her coldly. "If you don't want to be eaten by these things, then take off your clothes. I need burning materials." Amelie's face turned red. "Why don't you take off your clothes? You really won't take it off?" Dean was too lazy to explain the reason to her. He had a set of splitter armor, so it couldn't be burned. Only his underwear were flammable. But he naturally wouldn't take off his clothes until the last moment. Amelie had seen Dean's strength and domineering. She shivered in anger. She had never exposed her arms and thighs in front of a man before. She gritted her teeth. "If you want to kill me, then kill me. I'd rather die than be insulted by you." Quite chastity. Dean glanced at her. "I'll run out of fuel. If you don't take off your clothes, then I'll leave you here and let you be their dinner." Amelie raised her head to look at the passageway in front of her. Her sleeve was burning to the end and was about to be extinguished. From the light of the fire, she could see large numbers of wild worms circling around the flames and charging over. Her expression was ugly. She clenched her fists and did not make a sound. Dean didn't say anything more. He blew on the 2 black stones. The stones soon burned into a fiery red color. These were 2 pieces of coal. He carried them with him as fuel. They were also essential items in the wilderness. In most cases, the roll of these 2 stones was more useful than first aid medicine. After all, first aid medicine couldn't cure all kinds of injuries, but fire was indispensable to human beings. Dodian put the stone behind him after it was heated. Then he rushed to the front of the swarm of worms with his sword and quickly chopped them down. Whoosh! He activated his demon body, and the saber turned into a sticky liquid that covered his entire body. In the blink of an eye, he had turned into a monster with sharp blades all over his body. He stood in the tunnel like an evil god. Countless wild insects swarmed over. He waved the blades all over his body. In an instant, he was like the propeller of a helicopter. The grayish-white insects that swarmed 3 meters in front of him were quickly crushed into countless pieces. Amelie saw Dean's appearance through the flame. Although she couldn't see his face clearly, but the terrifying figure almost made her faint. Her heart was beating wildly. She didn't expect that the person she was accompanying was not a human but a monster. No wonder he was so indifferent. Boom! At this time, the giant worms in the passage rushed again. The piece of flesh that Amelie had thrown out had already been snatched. At this moment they were like a torrent. But when they were about to reach the 2 coal stones, their speed rapidly decreased. They stopped 3 meters away from the coal stones. They didn't dare to get close. Seeing this scene, Amelie's little heart slightly relaxed. She suddenly thought of an ancient legend. She didn't expect it to be true. These worms were extremely afraid of fire. To be precise, they were extremely afraid of high temperature. That's why the cave was so deep and cold. The giant worms stopped in front of the 2 coal stones. They didn't dare to get close. Some of the worms had round holes in front of them. Sharp blades came out of their mouth. They were like 2 praying mantis arms. They wriggled forward, but when they were about 2 meters away, they seemed to be burned and quickly shrank back. In fact, the temperature brought by the 2 coal stones was not high. But miraculously they blocked the giant worms that were comparable to pioneers. Dean was killing the worms in front of him while paying attention to the movements behind him. Seeing this scene, he was surprised. He thought that it would be good if he could slightly cushion the attacks of the giant worms. He didn't expect that they would all stop. How afraid of fire were they? He thought of Black Prison. It would explode at the slightest touch, and was also extremely afraid of fire. However, Black Prison was afraid of fire because its body was made of fat and oil. Moreover, Black Prison was an artificial product created by the Monster Research Institute. Could it be that the materials used to create Black Prison included this desolate worm? Chapter 847. Plop. Suddenly, a giant worm crawled to the top of the cave. The cave was about 4 meters high. The temperature of the coal shone on the top of the cave, giving the giant worm a chance to take advantage of it. Amelie screamed and retreated. Dean was scared by her scream. He turned around and his face changed. He quickly rushed to the front of the giant worm. His body was full of sharp blades. Puff! The giant worm was killed and cut into 7 or 8 pieces. Dean quickly returned to the front and blocked the worm's swarm. He shouted to Amelie, "Move a few stones from the side and pile them up. Put the coal on top and let the fire shine on the top." Amelie recovered, but there was still a trace of palpitation on her face. She quickly followed Dean's instructions and picked up a few stones from the side. But when she came to the front of the coal, she was in a dilemma. The coal was burning red. How could she take it to the top of the stone and pile it up? Dean paid attention to her movements. He could not help but roll his eyes. "Don't you know how to pull a piece of cloth to wrap them up and quickly bring them to the top of the stone? So stupid!" Amelie's face turned red. She tore off a piece of cloth. With her current strength, it was easy to tear the cloth. If it was before, she could only use her teeth to bite it. After tearing out a piece of cloth, she held both ends and pulled the coal to the top of the stone. At this time, the cloth was ignited by the coal. She saw that the worms were climbing up the rock wall. They wanted to find the weakest point to break in. She immediately threw the cloth towards the place where the worms were gathered. The flames danced and the giant bugs were in chaos. They screeched and shrank back. However, one of them could not retreat in time, and the burning cloth fell on its head. It immediately cried out in pain and thrashed around crazily. It smashed into the rock wall and created a few deep holes. Then it slowly slid down. Its body softened like it was melting ice. Especially on its head, which was covered by the burning cloth, the tissue actually fell down softly. Amelie did not expect that these terrible worms would be so easily injured. She was surprised and secretly excited. But soon she realized that fuel was a major problem. If there was enough fuel, she could kill these worms with her own strength. But in this damp cave, where would she get fuel? She looked at herself and blushed again. The coal was piled on top of the stone. The warm fire seemed to form an enchantment that blocked the cave. The fierce-looking worms were stagnant and did not dare to come close. A few minutes later, Dean had killed all the worms that were coming from the front passage. After several minutes of high-speed cutting, he had consumed a lot of physical strength. His whole body was sweating. After dealing with the worms in front of him, he sat on the ground and slowly untied his demonic body to restore his human appearance. He leaned against the rock wall with the demonic knife in his hand and gasped for breath. Amelie was relieved to see Dean return to his human form. Although she knew that Dean was not a human, but at least under his human appearance, she could still communicate with him. These worms seemed to be afraid of fire. Should we go out and find some fuel to deal with them? Amelie asked in a low voice. Dean glanced at her. It was naturally the best way to go out and find fuel. But he was afraid that if they went out, they would not have the opportunity to come back. The great priest had most likely set up an attack outside. Once they went out, they could only run away. He did not want to leave before he got the remains of the origami. He said, "If there is nothing to burn, then I will burn your clothes. If there is nothing to burn, then I will peel off your skin. Then I will fry the fat out of your skin and smear it on the stone." Amelie's heart was beating wildly. She shrank back. She imagined the scene of peeling off the skin. She felt the horror and pain. She gritted her teeth. "If you dare to do this, then I will die with you." Dean ignored her and looked at the giant worms gathered in front of the coal. He was surprised. The fear of fire was too strong for these giant worms. If it was 2 burning bonfires instead of 2 pieces of coal, they would be scared. He could understand, but just the temperature of the small coal was able to scare them. It was really inconceivable. Dean quietly watched and pondered. Suddenly he felt hungry. He took out some dry food from his backpack and ate it. Amelie saw Dean eat. She felt hungry too. She looked at Dean and wanted to ask for more food. But she thought about Dean's temperament. He might not give it to her. So she was too lazy to lose face. Dean looked at her and said, "Do you want to eat?" Amelie saw Dean take the initiative to ask. She was happy. She slightly raised her head and said, "Not bad." Dean grabbed something on the ground and threw it to her. "Eat." Amelie took it. She found that it was a wriggling worm. She was scared and almost threw it away. "This thing can improve your strength and fill your stomach. How good is it? Do you goddesses like to waste food?" Dean indifferently said. Amelie stared at him. She put the worm into a jar. She suddenly felt that her stomach was not so hungry. Time passed. After eating, Dean leaned against the rock wall to rest. After less than half an hour, he suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the ground in front of him that was full of worms. As he gazed at the ground, the rock wall next to the worms suddenly broke, and a few giant worms crawled out from inside. Dean's face changed. He turned around and saw that the number of giant worms in front of the coal stones had decreased. They had unexpectedly come to the other side of the cave. Amelie also noticed it. She was nervous. Dean quickly took out a piece of coal from his backpack. He took out a towel from his backpack and ignited it. He wrapped the burning towel around the coal stone and put it on the rock next to him. The giant worms that came from the other side of the passage stopped. Amelie was relieved. She heard Dean say, "It seems that we are surrounded. I told you to rush out to find fuel and then come back. You didn't believe me," Amelie said in a bad mood. Dean glanced at her. "Now there are only two ways. The first is to throw you out and lead the worms away. Then I will escape alone. The second is to wait here until the fuel is exhausted. Then I will throw you out and I will escape. Which one do you think is better?" "You." Amelie stared at him. Dean once again leaned against the rock wall and quietly pondered. He suddenly thought that these worms were very interested in the descendants of the Huang god. So it was reasonable to say that they were more interested in the remains of the Huang god. After all, the descendants of the Huang god had been passed down for many generations and the bloodline of the Huang god had become thin. Could it be that the remains of the Huang god in the depths of the cave had been eaten up? No, if that was the case, then why did these worms gather here? But if they were not eaten, why would they leave the remains of the origami and be attracted by him? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.